Chapter 136. However, Wang Zhen believed it. Perhaps he was lying to himself. When he saw that Yes Hen had retreated first, he immediately gave the order to go out and find a water source. With this order, the soldiers removed the encirclement, jumped out of the trench, and ran with all their might towards a small river 15 li away. The troops were instantly thrown into chaos. Looking from afar, one could only see a dense mass of black. However, after running for 3 to 4 li, tens of thousands of Walla elite cavalry suddenly appeared and charged into the chaos of the Ming dynasty army. When the soldiers reached 10,000, there was no end. When the soldiers reached 100,000, there was no end. The Walla army besieged the Ming dynasty army from all sides. The cavalry rushed in and waved their swords to kill the Ming dynasty army. The Ming dynasty army suffered heavy casualties. Wherever the cavalry swords passed, heads flew high into the air. At the same time, blood splattered everywhere. At the same time, they shouted, "Those who throw swords will not be killed." In times of crisis, we could see the shamelessness of the Ming dynasty officials. The Walla army's slogan was, "Those who throw swords will not be killed." As long as they threw away their armor and weapons, it was fine. However, in order to save their lives, these officials actually took off everything and trampled on each other naked. The number of people trampled to death by their own people was more than the number of people killed by the Walla army. At that time, the Walla army was already not in formation and did not have the heart to kill the enemy. This was because they were busy getting rich, specifically picking up gold, silver, jewels, and valuables to rob. At that time, if there were 1 or 2 strong generals who stood up and shouted, they might have been able to reverse the situation. During the Three Kingdoms period, Cao Cao did this. Qin Xiong also did this under Zhang Xutua and Li Mi. Unfortunately, Wang Zhen was not Cao Cao. The Ming dynasty generals did not have Qin Xiong or Qin Shubao. Everyone was busy taking off their clothes to save their lives. After taking off their clothes, the miserable state they were in became the laughingstock of history. Looking at Ingzong, this fellow, he did not even dismount from his horse. Instead, under the tight protection of the embroidered uniform guards, he broke out of the encirclement and escaped. It was a pity that everyone was busy taking off their clothes at that time, so there was no one to support him. The embroidered uniform guard failed to break through the encirclement, and in the end, Zhu Qizhen became a lone boat on the sea, drifting under the protection of General Fan Zhong. If not for Yang Qindong's appearance, he would have been like a little chick dragged to the north by the Walla army. Ever since he had left the capital, Yang Qindong had acted like a spectator, observing everything that was happening around him. The Ming dynasty army suffered defeat after defeat, and wrong orders were given out by Wang Zhen. Zhu Qizhen was like a puppet, only knowing how to nod his head in agreement and unable to debate. Yang Qindong looked on coldly from the side. This was a close understanding of ancient warfare, as well as a close observation of the Ming dynasty's military power. Even if some of the orders were wrong and were opposed by the officials, Zhu Qizhen agreed, and Wang Zhen carried them out. Even if Yang Qindong wanted to change anything, he could not do it. He could only watch as the army was surrounded and broken down. And in the end, the entire battle was a complete failure. In this, Yang Qindong was limited in what he could do. In the face of Wang Zhen, who had actual military power over hundreds of thousands of soldiers, unless he could hold Wang Zhen hostage, it was impossible for him to have any control over the war. Everything continued until the balance of the war was completely one-sided. The final moment had finally arrived. The Battle of Tumu could be considered a farce. There was no cavalry charging, no generals bravely killing the enemy, no decisive battle between large armies, and no spectacular sight of the firearms of the three major battalions opening fire on all fronts. The timing of Walla's attack was when the Ming dynasty's camp loosened up and moved to fetch water. Whether they fell for Yeshen's trick or the Ming dynasty took the initiative to fetch water, it was no longer important. "Young master, it's a mess. It's all a mess." Hu Mang's eyes were filled with vigilance as he scanned his surroundings. The Type 54 gun hidden under his sleeves was already loaded, and the safety was off. Whenever he discovered anyone trying to approach or threaten the young master, he would not hesitate to open fire and kill the enemy. Sigh. A sigh came from Yang Qindong's mouth. This sigh was for the hundreds of thousands of soldiers of the Ming dynasty. This sigh was for the decline of the Ming dynasty. This sigh was also for the sake of ending the chaos in front of him. Pass down the order. Follow the first set of plans. Yang Qindong's eyes were still cold, but if one looked carefully, there was a trace of liveliness and hope. After the order was given, the hundreds of people who had been wandering around began to move. Compared to the people around them who were in a complete mess and were even undressing, they were dressed in good clothes and moved quickly, each according to the previous plan. Wang Zhen, this eunuch, who only knew how to seize power and money, was like a headless fly at this moment. His eyes were constantly looking up and down, looking for a way to survive. For him, the defeat of the army was not terrible. As long as he could survive, everything would be fine. It would not be long before he could reorganize a new army and go to the battlefield. Of course, he might have the ability to do so, but whether or not he had the courage was another matter. His four eyes were still blinking rapidly when suddenly someone flashed past his side. In a chaotic army, this kind of scene was too common. The soldiers did not know their generals, and the generals did not know their soldiers. They were completely like headless flies running around. However, just as a figure flashed past him, Wang Zhen felt a sharp pain in his neck. Instinctively, he stretched out his hand to touch it. Blood spurted out uncontrollably into his hand, and the hot sensation caused his eyes to widen rapidly. Soon after, he started to scream. Save me! Someone killed me!" Wang Zhen was still conscious at this moment. He knew that, at this moment, someone had done something to him. But in a chaotic battlefield, death was a very common thing. Even if he was the head eunuch of the ceremony directorate, even if he was the most favored by Emperor Ming, no one was paying attention to him at this moment. One of his hands covered his neck that had been cut, as if he wanted to block the bleeding wound. The other hand was raised high and constantly waved, as if he wanted to use this to attract people's attention. He maintained this posture for 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. After about 7 to 8 breaths of time, he fell to his knees with a plop. Then his eyes turned gray, and his face showed an extremely strong expression of unwillingness. He was unwilling. He clearly had great power, so why did he fall to the ground? He was unwilling. The emperor had trusted him so much, and there was still a great future waiting for him. He was unwilling to accept the fact that he had died in such a dubious manner. Even when he died, he did not even know who had killed him. He was unwilling, but he was indeed dead. Wang Zhen was dead, dying in a chaotic battlefield. No one would pay attention to him. Even if someone saw him, they would probably want to step on him to vent their anger. Compared to Wang Zhen, who died at the hands of Lung Feng, Minister of Revenue Wang Zhua, and Minister of War Kuang Yi, were saved by Lung Feng. Tiger's Man and Xiao Feng respectively saved the two ministers and rushed to Yang Qindong's side. In comparison, Kuang Ye's clothes were not bad, and his appearance was not bad. No matter what, he was still the Minister of War, so he should have some integrity. However, the buttons on his shirt that he remembered wrongly showed that when Walla's army said, Remove your armor and don't kill those who throw blades. He was also flustered. Speaking of which, who was not afraid of death. When faced with death, it was not wrong for a person to react in any way. At least, it could not be said to be wrong, because it often replaced a person's instinct and nature. Huang Yi only remembered a few buttons wrongly. Compared to Wang Zhua, he was indeed much better. This was because our Minister of Revenue had already taken off his robes and was only wearing underwear. Moreover, it was wrinkled and didn't fit him at all. At a glance, one could tell that it was the kind of clothes that he had snatched from somewhere and put on temporarily. Yang Qindong was not surprised at all by Wang's reaction. As a scholar, he should have integrity. However, in a chaotic battlefield, he would be affected by others and completely lose his mind. It was reasonable for him to do things that he would not have dared to do before. When the two ministers were brought in front of Yang Qindong, their faces naturally turned red. They felt ashamed of their current behavior. But this feeling quickly disappeared and was replaced by curiosity. They were curious as to why, in such a chaotic situation, this crown prince, who was only a fifth-rank official, did not panic. Not only that, there were 10 to 20 strong men standing beside him. Compared to the panic of the other soldiers, these people stood up straight, and their expressions were extremely serious. Their eyes were like poles as they scanned the surroundings. Their vigilance was clearly telling others not to casually walk into this place. Otherwise, the consequences would be very serious. The two ministers were surprised, and many questions popped up in their minds. Then, another group of people came from afar. Their approach made the two of them nervous again. Don't worry, they are on the same side. Noticing the two ministers' reaction, Yang Qindong said softly. This was like the warm sunlight in the winter, instantly relaxing their minds. The people who came from afar were the Lung Feng of the Yang clan's new army. Under their protection, the Right Assistant Minister Ding Xian of the Ministry of Justice, the Right Assistant Minister Wang Yonghe of the Ministry of Works, the Left Assistant Minister Yang Shan of the Ministry of Rights, the Right Assistant Minister Deng Li of the Imperial Censorate, the Assistant Minister Huang Yangzheng of the Taichung Temple, the Assistant Minister Lu Rong of the Taichung Temple, and the Assistant Minister Ling Zhu of the Shangbao Temple were brought in front of Yang Qindong. Seeing the 7 people walking over, Yang Qindong's gaze carried a trace of doubt as he asked the Lung Feng, "Just these?" "It's just that some of them are still in good condition. The others have trampled on each other to death. Some of them have already been stripped clean, and it's hard to tell who is who." The platoon leader of the Lung Feng platoon stood at attention and said, Chapter 137. Well, my ability is limited. Being able to save these people is already very good. Let's go. Everyone, pack up and let's go find the emperor. Yang Qindong's chin gently moved. Although the first plan was to save 30 officials or marquis, the battlefield was originally ever-changing. No one could take care of everything. It was not easy to save a total of 9 people. At this time, the 9 Darren all noticed that something was wrong with Yang Qindong. This horse, Washer, seemed to be calmer than anyone else. He even seemed to have a small number of elite armed forces with good fighting strength. But to be able to reach this position, which one of them was not a shrewd person, at this time, no one would open their mouth to ask why. If they were unhappy, the other party would just casually abandon them. Other than waiting for death, they did not know what to do. No one raised an objection. Yang Qindong led everyone to the place where the emperor was. Originally, everyone was with the emperor, but when the war started, the whole situation became chaotic. Fortunately, Yang Qindong had already arranged for people to keep an eye on the emperor's every move. As someone who had foreseen all of this would happen, how could he abandon Zhu Qizhen, this important big shot, at such a critical time? compared to the chaos on the battlefield, where people were stripping off their armor and running away without resisting. The place where Zhu Qizhen was standing was very tragic. The performance of Hubin and the accompanying little eunuchs was probably the only bright spot in the whole change of the Tumu castle. They were shot into hedgehogs by the tiles, but they still fought to the death without retreating. Their purpose was to protect Emperor Zhu Qizhen, who was trembling in fear and had yellow water dripping from his trousers. Yes, at this time, Zhu Qizhen had completely lost the majesty of the emperor. His golden armor had long been thrown away. At this time, he was wearing an inner robe and was curled up in a corner, trembling. Later history books had recorded that even when Zhu Qizhen was captured by Walla's army, he was so calm, so brave, and even had a face of justice. He even dared to scold the enemy. But in fact, that was not the case. This was just a trick that Emperor Yingzong used to beautify himself after he became the emperor again. Only Yang Ming's The Orthodox Northern Hunting Story praised Zhu Qizhen as a flower. In fact, the records in Lin Rong records and Butai records were completely different, just like Lu Dingji's record of negation of Taishang. We can see three things from the Tumu Castle incident. First, Wang Zhen was indeed the culprit behind the Tumu Castle incident. Second, Zhu Qizhen was not calm at all. Third, the officials were very shameless, and the imperial guards Hubin were very loyal. When Yang Qindong and the 9 ministers arrived, they saw a group of Walla cavalry fighting against Hubin and the eunuchs. However, relatively speaking, the ones who were killed were the little eunuchs. By the time he arrived with everyone, all the eunuchs were dead, and not a single one was left. Only the general of the guards, Fan Zhong, and a dozen or so Hubin, who were seriously injured, were still resisting with all their might. Even though they were still far away, everyone could see that even their emperor would be captured by the Walla cavalry if they stayed any longer. The 9 ministers and all the new soldiers of the Yang family all looked at Yang Qindong. At this moment, he had undoubtedly become the backbone of everyone. Everyone's hopes were placed on him. Charge over, open a bloody path. Anyone who resists, kill. His face was indifferent, and his words fell from his mouth. If someone did not know, they would think that he was a general who had the overall situation under control. In fact, they only had 100 people, but the Walla cavalry had at least 300 people. The 9 ministers looked at Yang Qindong with suspicious eyes. They really could not understand what this horse-washing master was relying on at this moment. In contrast, the 100 soldiers were eager to give it a try. Speaking of which, these people had all been baptized by war. Some had participated in the war of Deng Maoqi's uprising, and also participated in the Battle of Ryukyu Island. Speaking of which, if these people did not have outstanding strength and outstanding performance, they would not have become soldiers of the 1st Company of the 1st Battalion. Most of the time, the 1st Battalion represented the strongest. But no matter how many battles they had participated in, how many victories they had won, it could not compare to this time. This was in front of the 6th young master. Perhaps many of the soldiers would not have such an opportunity in their lives. But now, the opportunity was in front of them. Who would not want to perform well? At this time, the role of the commander of the 1st Battalion, Xiao Feng, suddenly appeared. As an officer and the current leader of the army, after hearing Yang Qindong's order, he said without the slightest hesitation, "The 1st platoon is responsible for the left wing, the 2nd platoon is responsible for the right wing, the 3rd platoon is responsible for the 8th platoon, the 9th platoon is responsible for the safety of everyone, and the 10th platoon is responsible for the rear." After the order was given, the 100 soldiers of the 1st Battalion quickly moved. Some went to the left, some went to the right, and some rushed to the front of Yang Qindong and the others. In less than 10 breaths, everyone was in position. Their speed and agility opened the eyes of the Minister of War, Kuang Yi, who was in the crowd. He had lived for decades, and most of the time, he was in communication with the branch. He could not be more clear about the execution and mobility of the great Ming dynasty's army. It was precisely because of this that he could see the horror of this army that jumped out of nowhere. Not to mention other things, just their mobility alone was inferior to the great Ming dynasty's army that he had seen. Even the elite army, when Emperor Cheng was still alive, would not have such a performance. They were able to be orderly in times of danger without the slightest trace of disorder. While the ministers were dazzled, the 1st Battalion of the 1st Battalion completed the distribution of the battle formation. Then, after Xiao Feng said the word, "Advance," the army began to attack forward. Step by step, they were very steady. The eyes of the 100 soldiers also lit up, and they were full of courage. Before everyone could see what was going on, a black firearm that no one had seen before appeared in the hands of the soldiers of the 1st Battalion of the 1st Battalion. As soon as the firearm was taken out, these people seemed to have become one with it, giving people the feeling that this thing originally existed. The 100 soldiers moved forward in an orderly pace, narrowing the distance between them and the emperor step by step. The sudden appearance of this army naturally attracted the attention of the Walla cavalry not far away. The general who was in charge of commanding the battle saw that the great Ming dynasty's army was in chaos. Many of them were trampling on each other, many of them were running away, and some of them were surrendering. However, there was still an army that took the initiative to approach them. He was instantly infuriated. Still riding on the strong horse, the general did not put the 100 or so soldiers in front of him in his eyes. It was just a charge that could completely defeat them, so it did not arouse his interest. You, go and kill those reckless people for me. Don't let them live. Kill them all. General Walla felt that his dignity had been provoked. He must give these people a heavy blow and let others who still dared to resist see the consequences of disobeying them. Kill 50 to 60 Vala cavalrymen, dressed in the clothes of the Vala clan, were yelling and shouting as they charged towards Yang Chendong. In the eyes of the cavalry, as they charged, they would soon wipe out all the enemies like a gust of wind sweeping away fallen leaves. Although the 1st Battalion of the 1st Battalion of the 1st Battalion of the Great Ming Dynasty held a black firearm in their hands, they had seen such a battle formation before. The 3 firearm battalions of the Great Ming Dynasty's army, which had a total of 15,000 people, did not pose a threat to them. Didn't they all throw away their weapons and armor when the army charged? Be careful, the Walla cavalry is very brave and fierce. When the ministers saw the cavalry charging toward them, their bodies trembled and their voices trembled slightly compared to the ministers' fearful expressions. The 100 or so soldiers of the 1st Battalion of the 1st Battalion of the 1st Battalion of the Great Ming Dynasty did not take their eyes off the enemy. They all raised the firearms in their hands, and according to their usual training, they stood in formation and aimed at the corresponding cavalry. At this moment, all the soldiers of the 1st Battalion of the 1st Battalion adjusted the rhythm of their breathing and waited for Xiao Feng's order to shoot. 200 steps, 150 steps, 100 steps. As the commander, Xiao Feng calmly looked at everything in front of him. He did not show any abnormal reaction because of the charge of the enemy cavalry. When he estimated that the enemy was 100 steps away, he immediately opened his mouth and spat out 2 words, "Shoot." His voice was an order. Immediately, dozens of crisp gunshots rang out. The bullets whizzed out of the barrels, as if they were carrying a trace of fire as they rushed forward. Even the moment the gunshots rang out, they sounded so orderly as if there was only one person firing from the beginning to the end. These were the soldiers of the 1st Battalion of the 1st Battalion, the strongest elites that Yang Chendong had spent a lot of effort to train. Under the high-intensity training and layers of tests, Each and every one of the soldiers of the 1st Battalion of the 1st Battalion of the 1st Battalion of the 1st Battalion of the Great Ming Dynasty. When the gunshots rang out, the Walla cavalry charging toward them were like small trees that were swept up by a strong wind and fell to the ground one by one. At this moment, all of the 50 to 60 men fell off their horses. Only 56 horses that had lost their owners ran toward them. Try to capture as many war horses as possible for the lords to use. Yang Chundong looked at the results of the first round of shooting and nodded with satisfaction. His expression also relaxed a lot. Before seeing a real battle, even though Yang Chundong was extremely confident in his training, he still lacked confidence. Most of the time, training included drills, and real battle were two different things. Now, after a wave of bullets, it was effective. All the enemies were hit and killed, and no one was caught. This result was very satisfying and very gratifying. Chapter 138. After the order was given, Lung Feng grabbed the Vala horses one by one and brought them before the 9 ministers. What they received in return was a look of disbelief. Among the ministers, Kuang Ye's eyes were as wide as bells. What kind of firearm is this? How can it shoot so far and so accurately? Can you show it to me? Sorry, I can't. He watched as Kuang Ye's hand unconsciously reached for the gun in the hand of Lung Feng, who had delivered the horse to him. Kuang Ye moved his body slightly and dodged the gun. Then he looked at Lung Feng with a cold and murderous gaze. It was this look that made Kuang Ye's body tremble uncontrollably. At this moment, he felt that he was so close to the god of death. Sorry, Minister Feng, they are mercenaries. They only took my money to do something. They won't listen to anyone and won't allow anyone to touch the weapons in their hands. If you insist on doing so, there's only one outcome, and that's becoming a dead man. I can't protect you on this point. Yang Chundong saw Kuang Ye's awkwardness. He knew that if he didn't make things clear, everyone would be suspicious. Since that was the case, he might as well make things clear and dispel these people's suspicions. As soon as this was said, the officials who were originally curious withdrew their gazes and looked down, as if they did not care about what was going on outside. If they touched it, they would die. The price of curiosity was too high. It was so high that they couldn't bear it. Even Minister Kuang Ye became a lot more honest at this time and even apologized. This old man was reckless just now. It's my fault. It's fine. The ignorant are innocent. Just don't do it. Yang Chundong smiled and turned to Xiao Feng. Our emperor hasn't been rescued, and we haven't achieved our goal. We'll have to trouble you. Since they were collaborators, he had to be careful with his words. Xiao Feng, who was somewhat uncomfortable with Yang Chundong's attitude and tone of discussion, hurriedly said, Okay, since we've taken 6th young master's money, of course we'll do it well. Everyone, listen up. Keep moving forward. A few hundred steps away, General Wallace sat on his horse in a daze. Unknowingly, he already had the urge to pee, and it was almost flowing out uncontrollably. 50 to 60 cavalrymen were wiped out in the blink of an eye. Not a single one of them was able to get within 90 paces. They all died. One had to know that all of them had died without a single survivor. This had never happened before in previous battles. No one had even thought that such a situation would occur. But now, the truth had appeared. Again, let's go together and kill all of them. General Walla was angry. He didn't know that the emperor of the Great Ming Dynasty was already close at hand. He only needed 2 or 3 more charges to capture him alive. He was frightened by Yang Chundong's team. He felt that if he didn't deal with these people, it would be like a fishbone stuck in his throat, and he wouldn't feel safe at all. Many of the remaining 200 or so Walla cavalry also saw this scene. At first, They were indeed shocked, but with the general's shout, the heroic spirit in their hearts was stimulated. Each of them stared at the more than 100 people with covetous eyes, and then the cavalry charged. More than 200 cavalrymen against more than 100 people, and all of them were infantrymen. Moreover, there were no obstacles on the plains. No matter how one looked at it, there was no possibility of failure. Once the speed of the horses increased, the cavalry swords in their hands would only need to lightly slash, and a big head would fly. Ah! All kinds of screams were heard, and the Walla cavalry's charge began. With the help of the speed of the horses, the distance between the two sides was quickly shortened. "Be careful! Be careful!" Kuang Yi, Wang Zhua, and the other important officials were staring at the scene in front of them. Although they were already sitting on their horses, they still felt their bodies trembling. This was because they really didn't know how these mercenaries, as mentioned by Yang Qindong, would deal with more than 2 times the number of soldiers. This was naturally because they didn't understand these firearms. Their past experience told them that the power of firearms was indeed not small, but their weakness was also quite obvious. That was, after firing a shot, they had to reload. In this way, when facing more than 2 times the number of enemies, the firearms soldiers didn't have the slightest advantage. Raise your guns, ready to fire, different from the previous time. This time, Xiao Feng also raised the 95 style in his hand. The increase in the number of enemies made him want to join in the battle. However, this action of his had indeed caused the other Lung Feng members to show dissatisfaction. It was just more than 2 times the number of enemies, and they really didn't care about it. The battalion commander clearly wanted to satisfy his craving. Naturally, no one could guess the thoughts of the Lung Feng. Just when everyone thought that the battle was going to end badly, gunshots rang out. First, it was a volley of shots, and almost half of the enemy's troops were eliminated. Then, the gunshots were no longer as orderly as before, but it only gave the impression that there were a few more gunshots. Next, on the entire battlefield, only General Walla was escaping on his horse. At the most crucial moment, the general became afraid. He relied on his superb horsemanship to hide his body on the horse, and only then did he manage to dodge the shot. However, in front of the most elite Lung Feng, since you were already identified as a target, how could you escape? Even if you managed to dodge the first shot, you wouldn't be able to dodge the second. Xiao Feng raised his gun, and after his breathing calmed down, he moved his right index finger. After a crisp "pa" sound, the healthy horse fell to the ground. Once the healthy horse fell, General Walla naturally fell off the horse, then quickly got up and continued to run. However, after another gunshot, the body that was moving forward suddenly fell to the ground, and there was no more movement from it. The second shot was still fired by Xiao Feng. He wasn't arrogant enough to think that he could kill the target with one shot, so he only shot the horse to prepare himself for the next shot. 2 consecutive shots from the same gun finally killed General Walla, but at the same time, it opened Kuang Ye's eyes. Originally, he could tell that this gun was different from the guns in the Great Ming Dynasty, but he never expected that this gun could fire continuously and from such a long distance with such accuracy. This scene was tantamount to giving him a solid lesson. Although he was not out of danger yet, at this time, he was already considering whether he could buy such firearms from the army. If that was the case, why would the Great Ming Dynasty be afraid of a strong enemy? Xiao Feng's performance won Yang Qindong's applause. Not bad. Although it was only 2 words, it was enough to make Xiao Feng's face glow. He was even happier than if he had received a military medal. This was the 6th young master's praise. If Lung Song and Gao Xiong knew about it, they would probably be envious. Xiao Feng, who was satisfied, felt even more motivated. He immediately ordered, "Everyone, listen to my orders. Search and move forward. If you find any danger, You don't have to report it. Deal with it yourself. This was equivalent to handing the right to fire to the individual. The 100 Lung Fong members immediately became excited. Their eyes kept searching for the enemy who might not be completely dead yet. Perhaps it was because their previous shooting skills were too accurate, but along the way, they didn't find a single enemy that was not dead. This made the soldiers feel like they were not satisfied. On the contrary, Kwang Yi, Wang Zhuo, and the other important officials who followed them all the way breathed a sigh of relief in their hearts. With such a powerful mercenary group accompanying them, their safety should be much more guaranteed. After more than 300 steps, Zhu Qizhen finally took off his armor and appeared in everyone's line of sight in a yellow robe. Compared to his usual high and mighty appearance, at this moment, his eyes were filled with fear. His clothes were disheveled, and there was even a small bruise on his face. The bruise was probably caused by falling to the ground. In short, he was currently in a sorry state. When he saw Yang Qindong and the others, his originally lifeless eyes immediately became filled with a strong desire for life. Beloved official Yang, we are here. We are here. Check the injuries of the others and protect His Majesty. Yang Qindong also saw Zhu Qizhen. He then ran over to Zhu Qizhen's side, pretending to be terrified. Finally, he could grab Yang Qindong's hand. Zhu Qizhen said with a panicked expression, "Sir, you have misled me. You have misled me." At this moment, Zhu Qizhen still didn't forget to find a scapegoat for this great defeat. From this, it could be seen that no one who could become an emperor was simple. Yes, Eunuch Wang messed up the battle and caused a great defeat. He is guilty. However, he did it out of kindness. He just isn't good at leading troops. Yang Qindong knew how Zhu Qizhen felt about Wang Zhen. In history, this person was first captured and then sent back by Walla. He only regained the throne a few years later. However, once he took the throne, he didn't forget to build a colorful clay statue for Wang Zhen. He even built a monument for him. Just from this point alone, it could be seen how much Zhu Qizhen doted on Wang Zhen. He didn't believe that Zhu Qizhen would hate Wang Zhen just because of this great defeat. Furthermore, outsiders knew that he and Wang Zhen were working together. If he said anything overboard now, it would give people the impression that he was burning the bridge after crossing the river. Anyway, he had already been killed by Lung Fong. What did it matter if he said something nice? When Yang Qindong said this, Zhu Qizhen looked at him with admiration. He then said, "Beloved official Yang, you should send someone to see if you can find Sir. Perhaps he is fighting with the enemy somewhere." Chapter 139. Oh, okay. Yang Qindong nodded his head in agreement when he saw that it was true. This action was strongly opposed by Kwang Yi, Wang Zhuo, and the others. "That won't do, Your Majesty. We don't have many soldiers by our side right now. If we send more people out and encounter the Walla cavalry, I'm afraid it will be disastrous. Your Majesty, please reconsider." If Wang Zhen was here, they wouldn't dare to say this. However, they knew that he wasn't here and that he was most likely dead. Even if it was for their own safety, they could say anything. "That's right, that's right. We only have 100 mercenaries by our side. If we ask them for help, it will definitely divide our strength. If we encounter another enemy, we won't even know if we're dead or alive." Yang Qindong naturally wouldn't send Lung Fong to search for Wang Zhen. Wang Zhen was already dead. What was the point of searching for him? Thus, he pretended to be in a difficult position. When he mentioned that searching for Wang Zhen would divide their strength and put them in danger, Zhu Qizhen's desire to search for Wang Zhen wasn't as strong. After all, no matter how good their relationship was, if there was a possibility of losing their lives, they would have to think twice. "Sai, all right. I believe that Sir will be blessed by the heavens. He should be fine. Zhu Qizhen was forced to give up on searching for Wang Zhen. However, he then looked at Yang Chendong and said, "Beloved official Yang, who are these people? How did they have the strength to kill so many Walla cavalry and come to my side? Your Majesty, please forgive this subject for his innocence." Yang Chendong knew that this was an excellent opportunity to reveal the identities of Xiao Feng and the others. Of course, he wouldn't miss it. Thus, he pretended to be guilty as he spoke. "Sai, beloved official Yang, why are you doing this? You saved me. This is a great merit. How can I blame you?" Zhu Qizhen grabbed Yang Chendong and didn't let him kneel down. Instead, he spoke with an excited expression. It had to be said that Zhu Qizhen had a way of grasping people's hearts. Just like those words just now. Anyone who heard it would be inexplicably grateful, and even have the thought of going through water and treading on fire to repay the emperor's kindness. But who was Yang Chendong? In the future, being a monarch was just a status symbol to him. It was absolutely impossible for him to swear loyalty because of this. At the very least, it was not something that an incapable ruler like Zhu Qizhen could do. In his heart, he didn't take Zhu Qizhen's words to heart, but on the surface he pretended to be extremely touched and said, "How could this subject save the emperor? It's clear that the emperor is blessed by the heavens, which led this subject to rush over." Zhu Qizhen's face lit up with joy after hearing those words. His fearful expression seemed to have relaxed quite a bit. "Your Majesty, the reason why I said I was guilty was because I was afraid of death. That's why I spent a lot of money to hire these foreign mercenaries. They only recognize money and not people. In their eyes, there is no distinction between country and region. They will work for whoever can pay them. Your Majesty also knows that this subject doesn't lack money. I did it for the sake of my own safety. But I didn't report it to your Majesty in advance, which is also a crime." There was a dignified opportunity to say the identity of Xiao Feng and the others to Zhu Qizhen. As long as he knew, this matter would be legalized. Sure enough, when Zhu Qizhen heard this, he nodded with an understanding look. "Good, beloved official Yang is always prepared for a rainy day. But I just don't know how much they are so powerful." Zhu Qizhen wasn't the only one who thought this way. The other ministers were also very curious. After seeing the power of this mercenary army, they really wanted to know how much it was. In fact, the one who was most concerned about it was Zhu Qizhen. Although he didn't see it personally, to be able to come in front of him in the midst of the chaos, they must have some ability. Then, if everyone could hire such a powerful army, wouldn't it mean that they had the capital to rebel? How could he not pay attention to it? Feeling everyone's gaze on him, Yang Chendong smiled and said, "Your Majesty, coincidentally, they weren't hired by me in the beginning. They were barbarians from overseas who did business with me. This time, they were in charge of delivering goods to the skies beyond trading company. When I met them, the army was about to go to war. I discussed it with them and asked them to protect me for 10,000 taels per person. If it weren't for this coincidence, I'm afraid that they wouldn't be interested in such a small amount of money. 10,000 taels per person. 100 people would be 1,000,000 taels." After hearing this, Kuang Yi and Wang Zhua couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. Especially Wang Zhua. As the Minister of Revenue, he had a clear understanding of the great Ming dynasty's money. The value of the money that passed through his hands every year was very large. However, even he was shocked when he heard the price, not to mention the other important ministers. This answer also shocked Zhu Qizhen, so much that he broke out in a cold sweat. 1,000,000 taels of silver just to protect him? This Yang Chendong was really too rich. Of course, he was probably the only person in the entire court who could afford such a price. After all, whether it was the Immortal Abode or the Skies Beyond Trading Company, large amounts of money flowed in every day. This answer also allowed Zhu Qijin to breathe a sigh of relief. The higher the price of the mercenary army, the more relieved he would be. It also showed that not everyone had the ability to hire this army and achieve great things to threaten him. While they were talking, Tiger's Mane walked up to Yang Qindong. Young master, apart from General Fan Zhong's injuries, the rest of the Tiger's Mane didn't continue, but his continuous shaking of his head explained everything. When Yang Qindong heard this, he didn't make any decisions. Instead, he looked at Zhu Qijin with an expression that said, "You're the emperor, so you should make the decisions. Forget it, just let them be. When we return to the palace, we will reward their families greatly. As for what happens next, beloved Minister Yang and my other beloved ministers, what do you all think?" Zhu Qijin was very satisfied with Yang Qindong's attitude, but he really didn't have any ideas right now. After the army's defeat, his mind was already in a mess. Although he said he was asking the ministers, everyone's eyes were actually on Yang Qindong. It was clear that they had long since run out of ideas. In a situation where they were surrounded by enemies, there seemed to be no path out that was safe. Since he was the one who came up with the idea, Yang Qindong didn't hold back. He knew that the longer they stayed here, the greater the danger they would be in. Previously, because all of the Walla cavalry had been wiped out, the news didn't spread. But once the Walla army found out about their tracks, once the army pressed on, with only 100 people, there was still danger. All right, since the emperor has given this important task to this subject will give his own suggestion. Our current position is naturally the closest to Huailai County, but that place is also the most dangerous. The Walla will definitely be on guard against us, and will definitely arrange a large number of troops there. Then we might as well do the opposite and go to Yuzhou. Yang Qindong acted as if he had a card up his sleeve. In reality, this was also his plan from the beginning. That's right, catch them off guard and attack them when they least expect it. The art of war says that what is false and what is true and what is false. I'm sure no one will think that we will go to Yuzhou. After hearing Yang Qindong's suggestion, Minister of War Kuang Yi immediately supported it. Yang Qindong and Kuang Yi, who understood the art of war, both had the same idea. Zhu Qijin's heart was set. All right, then we will go to Yuzhou. After saying that, he got up and prepared to leave, but he was stopped by Yang Qindong. What is the meaning of this, Minister Yang? Zhu Qijin's expression changed greatly. He was afraid that this person would have evil intentions towards him. If that was the case, then with only the injured General Fan Zhong, he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to protect himself. Yang Qindong, what are you doing? Fan Zhong stepped forward with his hammer in hand in a questioning manner. But before he could get close, Tiger's Mane, Beta Persei, and Yang Wu had already surrounded him from 3 directions. It was guaranteed that if he took another step forward, his blood would splatter 5 feet and he would fall to the ground and die. The situation suddenly became tense. Yang Qindong hurriedly gave Tiger's Mane and the others a look to retreat, then half-knelt in front of Zhu Qijin. Your Majesty, this subject doesn't have any other intentions. It's just that if we are going to escape, Your Majesty must change your clothes. Change my clothes? Why? Zhu Qijin was puzzled. Your Majesty, wearing a yellow robe will easily attract other people's attention. It will also easily attract the Walla cavalry's pursuit. Yang Qindong cursed the other party's pighead in his heart, but on the surface, he looked like he was advising him. Oh, at this moment, Zhu Qijin came to his senses and nodded. That's right. Beloved official Yang is right. Since that's the case, we will take off the yellow robe. Yes, Your Majesty not only has to take off the robe, but also put it on someone else to confuse the enemy's attention. Yang Qindong's words shocked Kuang Yi and the other officials, causing them to become nervous. They first looked at each other, then slowly lowered their heads. These people's reactions fell into the eyes of Yang Qindong and Zhu Qizhen, and the latter was naturally unhappy. The former lowered his head and smiled, but when he looked up, he had already returned to his serious state. Your Majesty can put the yellow robe on Hu Ben, who died with a similar figure to you, to create a false image and use it to confuse the enemy. Hearing that they were going to let the dead wear clothes, Kuang Yi and the others raised their heads one by one, and their expressions returned to normal. Zhu Qizhen suddenly understood and said, "That's right. Beloved official Yang is right. This way, the Walla army will think that we have already ascended to heaven. This way, no one will pursue us." Chapter 140. Your Majesty is wise. Yang Qindong and several other important officials all knelt on the ground with respectful expressions. "Ha ha, officials, please rise. I will take off my clothes now." Zhu Qizhen seemed to have found the feeling of being an emperor again. With a laugh, he took off his yellow robe. Soon, Hu Ben, whose body was similar to Zhu Qizhen's, was brought in front of everyone. More importantly, his face had been cut several times. Everyone worked together and put the yellow robe on the body of the dead. Then, they identified the direction of Yuzhou and hurried over. About 2 hours after they left, a group of about 500 Walla cavalry rushed over. Among them was a eunuch wearing a eunuch uniform. This person was Shi Ning and could be considered an important eunuch in the group. Shi Ning followed the army out. When the chaos broke out, he was unfortunately caught by the Walla cavalry. Just as they were about to cut him to death, he shouted out his identity and said that he could help the Walla army find Ming Ingzong. In this way, the Ming dynasty would be within their reach. Shi Ning's words were too enticing. When the Walla general heard it, he couldn't help but be moved. Thus, he didn't kill him. Instead, he brought him to search for news of Zhu Qizhen. This group of people was led by the Walla king, and Shi Ning was among them. When they arrived at the battlefield, the bright yellow robe was immediately noticed by everyone. Shi Ning got off his horse and walked over to the corpse that was already unrecognizable. He carefully searched it and found Zhu Qizhen's jade pendant. He immediately said with joy, "General, this is the Ming dynasty emperor, but he is already dead." "Dead?" Sigh. Hearing that Zhu Qizhen was dead, a trace of hatred appeared on the Walla king's face. It was clear that a dead person had no effect on him. Noticing the disappointment on the competition king's face, Shi Ning, who was afraid that he would lose his life, rolled his eyes and said, "General, although the Ming dynasty emperor is already dead, we still have the jade pendant in our hands. We can still do something. I presume that this chaotic news will cause the Ming army to panic, and if we can use this chance, we might be able to attack the capital. Sir is very familiar with that place, with its countless treasures and beauties." Speaking of the prosperity of the capital, as a former emissary, how could the periodical king not know of it? Immediately, his expression changed from worry to joy as he said, "Good, good. Let's go. Follow me to see the leader. We are preparing to attack the capital of the great Ming dynasty." Ha ha ha. Zhu Qizhen had intentionally left the waist pendant behind, saying that it was to make it more realistic. He didn't expect that it would come in handy and become an item to identify his identity. At this time, great Ming Ingzong, who had changed into a bright tiger robe, was currently heading towards Shangshi Yuzhou with Yang Qindong and his group. Even if they didn't choose to walk to the front, they still encountered 2 of Walla's cavalry units. Each side had 100 cavalrymen, but when they met the cold front, they were like live targets. Before they could see clearly what kind of formation was on the other side and who was on the other side, They were all killed from afar. This was also the first time Zhu Qizhen saw the power of the cold front at such a close distance. For a moment, his heart was filled with fear. But when he thought that they were now being used by him, he couldn't help but feel relieved. Now that they had more healthy horses and more food from the bodies of the Walla cavalry, everyone began to speed up after eating and drinking to their heart's content. Regardless of whether it was day or night, they headed straight for Yuzhou. Shi Ning was brought to his elder brother, Yes Hen, who was also the leader of the Walla, by the periodical king. Yes Hen was tall and sturdy, and there was a sense of superiority in his eyes. His eyes were deep and sharp, and when he looked at Shi Ning, he was so scared that his heart jumped. "You said that this belongs to your Ming emperor?" Yes Hen asked casually as he played with the seemingly expensive waist pendant in his hand. Yes, Lord Chief, this belongs to our Ming emperor. He has already been killed by the brave Walla cavalry." Shi Ning knelt on the ground like a servant. After saying this, he was afraid that the other party wouldn't believe him. So he added, "This little one is a eunuch who follows the Ming emperor, so of course I wouldn't be wrong. Also, this little one is a Nuzaran, not a Han. I have long been looking forward to the army trampling on the great Ming dynasty and repeating the glory of the grassland people." Shi Ning was really afraid that he would die. At this moment, he didn't want to say anything nice, but he was afraid that Yes Hen would kill him if he was unhappy. Shi Ning's attitude made Yes Hen believe him. "Even if the Ming emperor is dead, do you think that their capital is now in chaos?" Previously, because the leader of the periodical king's guards, Tuj, angered Yang Chendong, all the spies of the Wara in the great Ming dynasty's capital were exposed and killed. If he wanted to understand the situation of the great Ming dynasty, he could only ask this little eunuch in front of him. Shi Ning was afraid that Yes Hen would kill him without asking any questions. If that happened, he wouldn't be able to show his value. Now, as long as the other party was willing to ask him, it proved that he was useful and his life was not in danger. And in order to better express himself and also to show his importance, he, who was kneeling on the ground, analyzed, "Leader, what the Ming dynasty does not lack the least is the emperor. The size of the imperial family is beyond our imagination. Even if the current emperor is dead, they can still elect a new emperor at any time." "What?" Shi Ning's answer made Yes Hen very unhappy. "Doesn't that mean that it's useless for us to kill the Ming emperor?" No, it's not like that." Shi Ning shook his head like a rattle drum. "Although the royal family of the Ming dynasty is very large, it's not difficult for them to elect a new emperor. However, it's difficult for a new emperor to gain power in a short period of time, and this is our opportunity. Therefore, we can't announce the death of the Ming emperor immediately. If we do, it will only give the other party more time to prepare. We can first march to the capital, and when the army reaches the city, we can announce the death of the Ming emperor. This way, even if they elect a new emperor, it will be difficult for them to form any resistance. At that time, the new regime will be replaced by the old regime, and it will be chaotic. This way, we can suppress the city with our army. At that time, this lowly one can persuade my friends, and perhaps we can open the city gates without shedding a drop of blood and completely enter the capital." Zhu Qizhen was already dead, and to Shi Ning, he had no hope. Even if he could safely return to the capital, how could another emperor trust him as much as Ingzong did? Perhaps the other eunuchs would be eager to kill him. Since there was no way out, he might as well vote for Walla. With his contributions in planning, once Walla succeeded, he might be able to become a powerful eunuch like Wang Zhen. At this moment, Shi Ning seemed to see the glorious light of the future. In order to achieve this goal, he really did his best to plan for Yes Hen. Okay, after hearing Shi Ning's words, Yes Hen was also moved. Originally, he only wanted to attack the border of the Ming dynasty to show his strength. However, he didn't expect to win the battle and even kill the Ming emperor. Now that he had the opportunity to enter the capital of the Ming dynasty, how could he give it up? Thinking back, he once asked the Ming emperor to marry a princess to him for the purpose of seeking peace, but he was rejected. Now, if he could enter the capital, wouldn't he be able to choose all the princesses? He would also be able to take revenge for the humiliation he suffered back then. Shi Ning's proposal was accepted by Yes Hen. Next, Walla's army began to clean up the battlefield. In terms of firearms alone, there were 14 great general cannons, 2,161 divine cannons, and 4,223 divine spears. In addition to other military necessities, it could be said that the harvest was quite bountiful. In the Ming army, Duke Gong Zhang Fu, Marquis Tai Ning Chining, Prince Consort Jing Yuan, Count Pingxiang Chen Huai, Count Xiangqing Li Zhen, Count Suiyan Chen Sun, Count Xiu Shen Rong, Governor Liang Cheng, Wang Gui Scholar Chao Nai, Zhang Hanlin Academy attendant Scholar Zhang Yi left, Governor Gong Quan of the Office of Transmission, Dai Qingzhu of Taichung Temple, Wang Yiju, Bao Liangzuo of the Imperial Secretariat, Yao Xian, Bao Hui, Censor Yugong, Pan Cheng, Qian Yu, Censor, Zhang Hong, Huang Chang, Wei Zhan, Xia Cheng, Yin Hong, Tong Kund, Sun Qing, Lin Xiangfeng, Lang Zhongqi Wang, Feng Shueming, Minister Counselor Wang Jian, Cheng Siwen, Cheng Cheng, Cheng Cheng, Lu Duan, Manager Yu Jian, Zhang Tang, Zhang Xian, Deputy Mayu of the Supreme Court, Yin Chang, Pedestrian Luo Ruyong, Xia Guanjing of the Imperial Astronomer, Lu Xian of the Imperial Astronomer, Li Gong, Shi Yu, and others all died in the battle. In this battle, more than half of the Ming army died, and a large amount of supplies were plundered by Yes Hen. Only the Minister of the Supreme Court, Xiao Weizhen, and a few others luckily escaped. Then there were the 9 important officials that Yang Qindong had saved. The 500,000 soldiers left behind by Ming Qingzhu Zhu Di had been completely wiped out, and the 3 most elite battalions had also been destroyed. The development of firearms for the army had been greatly hindered, and the gates to the capital had been opened. In the history of the Ming dynasty, this battle was known as the defeat of Tumu. This defeat had far-reaching effects, becoming the turning point for the Ming dynasty from the early to the middle stages. In the capital, when the news of Tumu's defeat reached the capital, everyone felt like they had been hit in the head with a stick. The streets were abuzz with discussion, and a chaotic situation was about to unfold. The imperial court was in an uproar, but no one was in charge. The imperial court was in a state of panic, and Zhu Qiyu, who was temporarily in charge of court affairs, felt as if he was sitting on pins and needles. He had originally thought that he was only temporarily in charge of court affairs, and if there were any problems, the officials would deal with them. He was just putting on an act, waiting for Emperor Zhu Qizhen to return so that he could report on his task perfectly and continue to be a king. But he had never imagined that the army would be defeated, and defeated so miserably. According to the news from the front lines, the field was littered with corpses. Now, there was no news of Emperor Zhu Qizhen. To say something disrespectful, no one knew whether he was dead or alive. Since no one knew whether the emperor was dead or alive, his burden had undoubtedly become very heavy. Just like now, all the officials were asking him for his opinion, causing him to feel uneasy and unsure of how to respond. Chapter 141. Prince Cheng, the military report, says that Walla's army is coming to the capital. Baiyang Pass is in an emergency. If we don't do anything about it, Zijing Pass and Juyong Pass will be in danger. At that time, Walla's army will come to the capital. Wang Ji, the Minister of Personnel, as one of the old officials, stood out bravely and told Zhu Qiyu about the danger of the current situation. Then what should we do? Zhu Qiyu, who had never been in charge of the court, was at a loss. Prince Yu, Minister Wang, we should be discussing the whereabouts of His Majesty, and whether he will be able to return. Hu Xiao, the Minister of the Ministry of Rites, stepped forward with his ceremonial tablet in hand and spoke with a worried expression. A snake can't do without a head. No one could make the final decision. No one could think of the same thing. Minister Hu is right. The most important thing now is to find out where His Majesty is and where the other officials are. Jin Lian, the Minister of Justice, and Shi Pu, the Minister of Works, both held their tablets and raised their heads high to express their thoughts. Well, if that's the case, go and find out where His Majesty is. Zhu Qiyu, Prince Cheng, nodded in agreement. If he knew that Zhu Qizhen was still alive, he would find a way to bring him back to preside over the situation. If he was gone, Zhu Qiyu didn't think too much about it for now. The court meeting ended in such a hurry that they did not manage to come to a conclusion. The spies of the Eastern Palace guards and the brocade guards began to move. However, facing the Walla's army on the battlefield, it was not possible to find out the real information in a short time. Zhu Qiyu returned to the Nangong Palace with a worried look. The Nangong Palace was a side hall in the palace. Because it was only in a corner of the palace, few people came here. When Zhu Qizhen had left, he had arranged for his younger brother to stay here as a warning. Because the crown prince was only 2 years old and had just been established, he couldn't supervise the country. Therefore, Zhu Qiyu was asked to stay here. But it was just to let him stand there as a puppet. It was impossible for him to have any power or have any thoughts about the imperial power. The arrangement of the remote Nangong Palace was a warning to Zhu Qiyu that she had to grasp her own position and not overstep her authority. Zhu Qiyu did not have any thoughts about being assigned to Nangong's place. He was very clear about his own position, but that was based on Zhu Qizhen's triumphant return. Naturally, he had to return to his seat. But now, Zhu Qiyu's mood was very complicated. She walked back to the Nangong Palace, where she was temporarily staying. She happened to see a few eunuchs not far away. They seemed to be talking about her and pointing at something. For a moment, anger rose in his heart. It was true that he was a puppet, but at the same time, he was also a prince. How could he allow some little eunuchs to order him around? For a moment, anger rose from his heart, and a trace of killing intent appeared in his heart. However, this killing intent was forcefully suppressed as soon as it arose. Now, that Ing Zong's fate was unknown. What if he was on the way back? If he killed a little eunuch in the palace without permission, wouldn't that give him something to use against him? Zhu Qiyu knew very well that this elder brother of his was not very broad-minded. Zhu Qiyu wanted to keep the peace and suppress his anger. However, at this moment, a great eunuch in a python robe suddenly appeared from the side. He looked coldly at the 4 little eunuchs who were gathered together and discussing. You don't do anything in the palace, but talk nonsense here. Do you really have nothing better to do? Come on, drag them away and give each of them 40 strokes of the military rod. 40 strokes of the military rod was tantamount to taking their lives. When the 4 little eunuchs heard this, their expressions changed dramatically. They hurriedly knelt on the ground and begged for mercy. However, a few little eunuchs had already come over and pulled them up one by one and dragged them away. The little eunuchs dared to look down on him and paid the price with their lives. Zhu Qiyu felt relieved and vented a lot of the anger that had accumulated over the past few days. Your Highness Prince Cheng, I'm here to pay my respects. Just as Zhu Qiyu was feeling relieved, the eunuch who had shouted just now came to Zhu Qiyu with a slight bow. To be able to wear a python robe, needless to say, his status among the eunuchs was extremely high. In fact, there were only 2 people in the palace who could do this. One was Wang Zhen, who had already been killed, and the other was Jin Ying from Annan. After entering the palace, he served Taizong, Renzong, Xuanzong, and Yingzong. In the last years of Yongle, when he was about 30 years old, he was promoted to the right supervisor of the ceremony directorate. After Renzong ascended the throne, the people under the name of Zhangding, who was about to be exiled, were all rewarded to him, including real estate and trees, as well as the people and land of his son-in-law Tiango. In the 7th year of Xuanda, 1432, because of his loyalty and diligence, he was also given a decree of exemption from death. Later, he was given a silver record and promoted to a eunuch of the ceremony directorate. Yingzong Zhu Qizhen was only 9 years old when he ascended the throne. Eunuch Wang Zhen would play with him, and he doted on Wang Zhen the most. Thus, Wang Zhen took out Jin Ying and the other eunuchs to take charge of the ceremony directorate. Jin Ying could only give in to him everywhere. Rather than giving in to him everywhere, it was better to say that he was hibernating. This was because he had always been the eunuch in charge of the ceremony directorate. Moreover, he was the first eunuch and enjoyed a very high position. It was just that Wang Zhen was in the limelight for a while, so no one paid attention to him. Jin Ying's sudden appearance at this time, and it looked like he was standing up for Zhu Qiyu. The meaning behind this was worth pondering. Zhu Qiyu's impression of Jin Ying was quite good, not for anything else, but because this person was one of the few people who treated him with respect. Perhaps it was because they were both oppressed, or perhaps it was because they had the same experience and knew what hibernation meant. So naturally, there were too many similarities. Many thanks, Eunuch Jin. Zhu Qiyu smiled and spoke to Jin Ying with a smile in his eyes. At the same time, he bowed slightly to express his gratitude. You can't do that. Yu Wang has a precious body and is in charge of court affairs. How can you be so polite to a eunuch like me? Jin Ying's face was filled with fear and trepidation. His head was extremely low, as if he was about to make intimate contact with the ground with his knees. At the mention of being in charge of court affairs, Zhu Qiyu's expression turned bitter. His starry eyes were filled with power as he said, "What? Is Eunuch Jin also here to make fun of my incompetence in court?" Jin Ying, who was said to be knowledgeable, could not be more familiar with this feeling. After all, he had experienced 4 emperors. But at this time, he still pretended to be very afraid and shook his head violently. "Your Highness Yu Wang, please forgive me. This subject does not have such thoughts. On the contrary, this subject believes that Yu Wang was just born at the wrong time. Otherwise, with your great wisdom, it would not be difficult for you to become a wise ruler." Sure, Zhu Qiyu was really frightened by Jin Ying's words. He looked around nervously. "Eunuch Jin, don't harm this prince." "Your Highness Yu Wang, don't worry. No matter what, this subject has been in the palace for so many years and has some power of my own. There is no third person within 100 steps of this place. You can rest assured." Jin Ying's face was full of confidence. This time, he had come to find Zhu Qiyu taking a certain risk. He had also come to express his loyalty and surrender. Since that was the case, how could he not make the necessary preparations? Let's go into the hall and talk. Zhu Qiyu knew that if Jin Ying dared to say this, it must have been arranged. After all, once Zhu Qizhen found out that he had been in close contact with eunuchs in private, he would be suspected. He did not know what would happen to him, but Jin Ying regarded himself as a subject, so his intentions were clear. Jin Ying had been in the palace for so many years, so it was impossible for him not to know something that even Zhu Qiyu himself knew. And since he still dared to come, he must have something to say to him. At that moment, he strode into the hall with a considerate look. Jin Ying followed half a step behind him. He followed closely behind with his head lowered, but if he was willing to raise his head at this moment, he would be able to see a very determined expression on his face. It was determination, because this time, Jining had come to persuade Zhu Qiyu to take the throne. Regardless of whether Zhu Qizhen was alive or not, and whether he could return to the palace, in Jin Ying's eyes, he was already a useless person. The change of imperial power had always been a matter of swords and blades. Since you dared to leave the palace, you should be prepared for a turtle dove to take over your nest. If you wanted to blame someone, you could only blame Zhu Qizhen for trusting and doting on Wang Zhen too much. Since you doted on someone else and did not give yourself a way out, don't blame him for looking for another way. Then, in the hall of the Nangong Palace, Zhu Qiyu and Jining chatted for a long time. No one knew what they talked about, but the various events that followed were enough to deduce what they had said and what they had planned. The Hu residence. After Hu Shao and Hu Zhongning returned to the residence from court, they gave strict orders that no one was to leave the residence without their permission. Even the maids in charge of buying groceries and cooking in the residence had to set a time limit. When they went out, they had to bring a few more servants with them. With the situation at court in chaos, no one knew what would happen next. Based on Hu Zhao's many years of experience as an official, it was better to avoid unnecessary trouble. First, they would wait and see. Then, they would place heavy bets. This was a wise move. Because of this order, the atmosphere in the entire Hu residence became very tense and oppressive. In Hu Yan's room in the backyard, she was pacing back and forth anxiously. After a while, the servant girl, Xiao Qing, stumbled into the room with an anxious look on her face. "Little Qing, what did you find out? Is there any news of him?" When she saw her personal servant girl, Hu Yan stepped forward and grabbed her hands. Her face was full of anxiety and worry. Chapter 142. Me, Young Mississippi. The main, side, and back doors of the estate have all been closed. Without master's orders, no one is allowed to leave. Little Qing panted as she recounted what she had seen to Hu Yan. When she heard that all the doors of the estate had been closed, Hu Yan had a bad premonition. If nothing major had happened, such a change wouldn't have occurred. Her expression couldn't help but change slightly. When she looked at little Qing, there was a hint of anxiousness. "I asked you to gather information. What's the result?" "This." Little Qing shook her head. "I couldn't leave the estate, so I couldn't get any more information. However, when I asked Lieutenant Sun Chuang, he said that it seemed that the front lines had been defeated." "Defeated? Seems?" Hu Yan's heart skipped a beat. "Has this information been confirmed?" As she spoke, she tightened her grip on little Qing's wrist. "Young miss, you also know that with Sun Chuang's status, what he knows is limited. Young miss, hurry up and let go. You're hurting me." Little Qing's eyes were hazy with tears. Hu Yan's grip had truly hurt her. Hu Yan mechanically released her grip and sat back down in her chair. Her eyes were empty as she said, "He'll be fine. He'll be fine." Quite a few people in the capital were reacting in the same way as Hu Yan. This was especially true for the hundreds of family members of the officials who had accompanied the army. They could vaguely sense that something was wrong. Even though there was still no confirmation, the atmosphere had already turned icy cold. As a result, the business of the immortal abode and the realm beyond heaven began to wane. In the past, the seats had always been in short supply, but now they had lost at least 30% of their customers. They no longer had to wait in line to spend money. 5 days later, amidst this oppressive atmosphere, a group of soldiers arrived at the gates of the capital. The leader had a strange appearance. He had a square face, a tall stature, and a knee-length beard. He was skilled in horseback riding and archery, and a large saber hung beside his sturdy horse. He exuded a fierce killing intent. However, at this moment, there wasn't the slightest bit of killing intent in his eyes. There was only anxiety. He was Datong Prefecture's Governor Shi Heng. Shi Heng, Marquis Shi Ning Song Ying, Wu Jin Bo Zhumian, and the others fought against the Walla cavalry at Yanghaku. After the deaths of Song and Zhu, he had returned alone. Along the way, he had recruited soldiers and brought back several hundred cavalry. This time, he had returned to the capital to atone for his crimes by performing meritorious deeds. Shi Heng came back with the latest news from the front line. When Zhu Qiyu, the imperial tutor prince, found out about this, he immediately summoned all the fourth rank and above officials in the capital to the palace for a discussion. In the imperial court, Shi Heng knelt before Zhu Qiyu and recounted in detail what he had experienced and what he had seen. After he finished speaking, he continued to kowtow to the ground. As he kowtowed, he said, "Your humble servant is incompetent. At this moment, Shi Heng was acting like a loyal and brave general. Instead of saying that he was repenting, it was better to say that he was showing off his achievements. General Shi, please rise. This prince wants to ask you, how is the emperor? How are the other officials?" Zhu Qiyu, the imperial tutor prince, asked anxiously. However, others did not know that there was a ball of fire burning in his chest at this moment. "Your Highness Imperial Tutor Prince, the Emperor has ascended to heaven." Shi Heng slowly raised his head and blinked his eyes hard. But no matter how one looked at him, he did not look like he was about to cry. His expression was still vivid, giving people the feeling that he was very sad and in pain. "What?" Zhu Qiyu's body trembled when he heard this. He almost slipped off his chair. Fortunately, Ji Ning, who was standing to the side, helped him in time, so he did not make a fool of himself. At this moment, the other officials were also shocked. Some of the timid ones even knelt on the ground and began to cry. There were also some officials who could not believe Shi Heng's words. After all, according to the battle report, the Vola cavalry and infantry only had 60 to 70,000 soldiers. However, the great Ming Empire had sent an army of 500,000 soldiers, including many elite troops. How could they be defeated? Moreover, they were defeated so thoroughly that even the lives of the emperor and hundreds of officials were lost. "Governor Shi, did you see the death of the emperor and the officials with your own eyes?" Among the officials, Wang Zhi, the minister of the Ministry of Personnel, was relatively calm. He really could not understand how they could have been defeated so miserably when they had outnumbered the enemy by 7 to 8 times. No, this official did not see the death of the emperor and the officials with my own eyes. But because of Wang Zhen's careless command, the army did not care about each other. The general did not know the soldiers, and the soldiers did not know the general. In addition, there was a lack of water and food, and the morale was low. When faced with the elite cavalry of the Walla, they fled or were injured. It was chaos. This official did not know where the emperor and the officials were at that time. But later, when we fought with a small number of the Walla cavalry, I learned the news from the captives. This official did not dare to delay any longer, so I killed my way out with my men. Shi Heng kept beautifying himself as he spoke. He gave people the impression that he had given up on fighting the enemy in order to bring back news. But in reality, he had heard this news from some of the great Ming dynasty's deserters who understood the Walla language. "Impudent! How can you insult my father like this?" Just as Shi Heng finished speaking, 3 people walked out from the crowd. They were the commander of the brocade guards, Ma Shun, primary 3rd rank, the commander of the brocade guards, Wang Shan, secondary 3rd rank, and the commander of the brocade guards, Wang Lin, primary 4th rank. When the 2 of them heard that Shi Heng had put all the blame on Wang Zhen, how could they let it go? One of them was Wang Zhen's confidant, and the other was Wang Zhen's nephew. They were deeply indebted to Wang Zhen and would not allow anyone to speak ill of Wang Zhen. As soon as the two of them jumped out, Jining, who was standing next to the throne, raised his eyebrows. He had been waiting for this moment for far too long. It was precisely because of these people that his authority had been completely stripped away. Now that he finally had a chance to take revenge and eliminate his dissidents, how could he let go of such an opportunity? He had even summoned officials of the fourth rank and above to discuss this matter precisely to lure out Wang Zhen's confidants. If Yang Qindong were here, he would definitely be suspicious. History had already begun to deviate from its original course. In reality, because of his appearance, many things had already changed. It was precisely because of the establishment of the realm beyond heaven and the immortal abode that Wang Zhen was able to earn money so quickly that he found it difficult to put anyone aside from the emperor. This made Jining even more dissatisfied with him than in history. The three of them stepped out at the same time and glared at Shi Heng, giving him a fright. I'm only speaking the truth. What do you want to do? What do we want to do? Scoundrels like you who spread false information should be put to death. Men, drag him away and behead him. Ma Shun's gaze was as sharp as a sword as he stared at Shi Heng. He looked like he wouldn't give up until he had skinned him alive. As soon as he spoke, 6 tall, burly embroidered uniform guards walked in. They were dressed in flying robes. As soon as the embroidered uniform guards appeared, the atmosphere in the imperial court froze. The expressions of all the officials changed greatly. It was clear that they had all suffered at the hands of these people before. They were terrified from the bottom of their hearts. At this moment, no one noticed that the Mastiff Prince, Zhu Qiyu, and Jining, the eunuch of the ceremony directorate, were exchanging glances. It was clear that they had already known that something like this was going to happen. Zhu Qiyu nodded lightly, as if in tacit agreement. Jining took a step forward, and his voice suddenly grew louder. Come, why aren't you arresting these 3 traitors for disrupting the imperial court? Behead them as punishment. Jining suddenly stood up and said that she wanted to kill 3 people instead of 1. For a moment, the emperor and his subjects were stunned. Even Ma Shun and the other 2 had a look of surprise in their eyes. They could not understand how Jining could make a mistake in such a situation. They didn't understand earlier because the 6 embroidered uniform guards hadn't made a move yet. But when the 6 of them stepped forward and subdued Ma Shun, Wang Shan, and Wang Lin, they finally understood what was going on. Jining, you traitor, what are you trying to do? Let me go immediately, or I'll make sure you're beheaded. Being subdued by 2 extremely strong embroidered uniform guards, Ma Shun resisted a few times without any success. So he started cursing loudly. Jining, who had been prepared for this, had a cold expression. He said in a disdainful tone, You're about to die, but you're still so arrogant. Come, drag him away and behead him. When the 6 strong embroidered uniform guards heard this, they dragged Ma Shun and the other 2 out of the imperial court. Not long after, 3 shouts came from outside. Needless to say, Ma Shun and the other 2 had been beheaded. Their most loyal lackeys had been killed. The officials were all trembling with fear, especially those who had previously sided with Wang Zhen. They were so nervous that they broke out in cold sweat. They didn't know if Jining, who seemed to be in control of the imperial court, would suddenly attack them. Killing people was to establish authority and also to intimidate. Now it seemed that the effect was quite good. Jining sighed softly in his heart. Don't blame me. You forced me to do this. After giving himself an explanation, he suddenly turned and knelt down in front of Zhu Qiyu, the Duke of Yan. Your Highness, the Duke of Yan, now that the Ying sect is in trouble, the great Ming is in danger. please ascend the throne, preside over the situation, and lead the great Ming back to glory. When Jining knelt down, the entire imperial court fell silent. It was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. Obviously, this was something that no one had foreseen or prepared for. But this silence only lasted for a moment. Shi Hung suddenly pounded his head on the ground and shouted, "This official requests the Duke of Yen to ascend the throne and establish the empire." With Shi Hung taking the lead, the officials who reacted quickly knelt down one by one and begged the Duke of Yen, Zhu Qiu, to ascend the throne and become the emperor. Shi Hung had said that the Ying sect, Zhu Qizhen, had already died on the battlefield. Even so, someone had to be the emperor. Now it seemed that with the status of regent, the younger brother of the emperor, and the bloodline of the Zhu family, it was perfectly justified for him to inherit the empire. Chapter 143. With the situation settled, all the officials knelt on the ground and cheered. Since ancient times, there was a saying that there were 3 requests. Zhu Qiu immediately rejected them. After that, the officials invited him, rejected him, and invited him a 3rd time. Only then was the matter settled. Immediately, everyone and Zhu Qiu went to see the Empress Dowager to go through the final approval process. That day, Zhu Qiu became the emperor. Because the war was imminent, the situation was urgent. The officials knelt on the ground and recognized Zhu Qiu as the emperor. His title was Daizong, and his name was Jingtai. He made Yingzong's son, Zhu Jianxin, later Xinzong, the crown prince. This important imperial edict was passed down by Jining. Now, Jining had become a powerful official like Wang Zhen during Yingzong's time. Jining also received the favor of Empress Dowager's son and the new emperor. Whether it was Wang Zhen or Jining, this was the result of the system and environment. The Ming dynasty was an unprecedentedly powerful dynasty. This was why the emperor dared to give power to the eunuchs. Although the eunuchs of the Ming dynasty had so much power, when the emperor really wanted to punish them, he only needed to write an imperial edict, and these eunuchs would be doomed eternally. Lu Jin and Wei Zhongxin both ended up like this. Thus, the emperor was not worried about the eunuchs being disloyal. Secondly, the emperor had no choice but to use the eunuchs. The Ming dynasty officials were very powerful. At their peak, they dared to publicly criticize the emperor. Although the emperor was the son of heaven and had unparalleled power, but in front of all the officials, he was all alone. In order to break the unity of the officials, the emperor could only use the eunuchs to restrict the power of the officials. Although the eunuchs were mostly dark, they all knew that the only thing they could rely on was the emperor. Thus, they were all loyal. Thus, to the emperor, the eunuchs were more reliable than the officials. Now that Jining had taken the initiative, she should have immediately attacked Wang Zhen's faction. However, this was not the result of a peaceful development. It was the result of a crisis. At this time, the military report said that Walla's army was approaching. If the palace was in chaos now, it would be bad for the overall situation. In order to give Emperor Jing and Zhu Qiu a good impression, Jining didn't attack Wang Zhenyu's supporters. Instead, she began to unite the majority of the people and prepared to fight the enemy together. It was because of his generosity that many eunuchs took the initiative to defect and change their allegiance. Even those who were loyal to Wang Zhen became much more well-behaved and hid among the crowd. For example, Wang Zhen's trusted eunuch of the imperial horse supervisor, Chun Guan, had become an old dog that didn't bite. He had become very obedient. Whenever Jining gave an order, he would completely obey. There wasn't the slightest bit of difference. There were also eunuchs Chao Jixiang, Gao Rang, Mao Mu, and Qian Sengbao, the imperial horse directorate's chief eunuch, who were all very low-key. Don't cause trouble, and do your best to complete the tasks assigned to you. However, everyone could see that these people were still waiting to see the situation. They were waiting for the arrival of Tile's army before making a final decision. In this regard, Jin Ing didn't have any better ideas. Zhu Qiyu was willing to delegate power to her, but not without a bottom line. If he wanted to unify the group of eunuchs, which even Wang Zhen hadn't been able to do, she was afraid that the first unlucky one would be her. It was still the same saying, "I can use you, but I also have to be wary of you." This was the basic attitude of the emperor towards eunuchs. Jin Ing became the eunuch in charge of power and was promoted to chief eunuch of the ceremony directorate by Zhu Qiyu. For a time, she held great power. Her fangs were unfurled. The group of eunuchs wasn't easy to move. They were all under the emperor's nose. If there was any wind blowing, it would be very difficult to hide. Thus, she began to move against the officials. She arranged for Lu Gui, who had just been promoted to commander of the brocade guard, to walk through the homes of the officials, looking for their weaknesses and problems to threaten. Lu Gui brought the new commander of the brocade guard, Han Ji, to visit the important officials one by one. The Minister of Works, Shi Pu, had originally gotten his position from Wang Zhen. After Wang Zhen fell from power, he used Lu Gui to bribe Jin Ing to keep his position. Jin Ying's family also asked for stone, grass, and other materials to build a private room for Jin Ing, and so on from the officials of the Military Preparation Office and internal envoy Yi Jingrong. Many of the important officials were threatened because of this. The lighter ones were given a sum of money to settle the matter. There were even some who were directly sent to prison. As the residents of the Minister of Rights, Hu Mang, the Hu manor also suffered a lot from Lu Gui and Han Ji. Not only did they give a large sum of money, Hu Changning was also ordered to reflect on his mistakes at home on the grounds that he was suspended from his duties. Jin Ing had made such a big move that some of the officials who liked to curry favor could no longer remain calm. They all thought of ways to establish a relationship with her. Among them was the head of the Hanlin Academy, Wang Go, who was also Yang Duo's husband. Wang Go had given all of his family's gold and silver to the new commander of the brocade guard, Han Ji. As a result, he had been promoted from the original 9th rank to the 7th rank editor. Not only had he been promoted, but he had also taken the position of his former superior, Wang Si. Although Wang Si's grandfather, the Minister of Appointments, Wang Ji, had also been threatened, he had only given money to ensure his safety and had not expressed his loyalty to Jin Ing. His position was not easy to move, but his family members, such as his grandson Wang Si, had been removed from their positions and thrown back home. Originally, when they were in the Hanlin Academy, because Wang Si and Yang Qindong had a good personal relationship, he had always suppressed Wang Go and made him suffer. Now, not only had he been promoted, he had also removed the mountain above his head. Next, the first thing Wang Go, who was proud of his position in the government, did was find Yang Duo. He said that he had taken a fancy to the servant girl Xiao Chui and wanted her to warm his room. Xiao Chui was one of the 10 servant girls that Yang Qindong had given to Yang Duo. She was quite beautiful, and Wang Go had also coveted her for a long time. However, she had been sent by Yang Qindong. Even if he had the intention, he did not have the courage. However, now that he had heard that Yang Qindong and Ingzong had died on the battlefield together, he no longer had anything to restrain himself from. Thus, he wanted to show off his power as a man. Yang Duo naturally rejected Wang Go's request. Xiao Chui also threatened to kill herself, saying that if Wang Go touched a single finger of hers, she would die in front of him. If that really happened, it would be inevitable that there would be endless trouble. Wang Go knew that he could not do it. In a fit of anger, he decided to divorce his wife and divorce Yang Duo. At the same time, he married a distant sister of Han Ji as his first wife. During this period of time, because of his sixth brother Yang Chendong, Wang Go's attitude towards Yang Duo had changed. As a woman, and a married woman at that, it was fine if she wanted to live a good life. However, she did not expect that misfortune would descend so quickly. Before she could react, the divorce paper was in front of her. In ancient times, many women divorced their husbands because of emotional discord or other reasons. If it was an amicable divorce, it proved that it was not a woman's problem. Naturally, it would be much easier for the woman to find another man. However, if she was divorced, it was equivalent to carrying a bad reputation for the rest of her life. It would be difficult for her to find a suitable husband. Even if she was married, she would often be looked down upon by her husband's family because of this matter. Accompanied by 10 maids, Yang Duo left the Wang family. She did not even look back because this was the place where she felt sad. After leaving the Wang family, Yang Duo was considered homeless. In the end, she decided to go to the Yang family village. In the village, when she saw Qiao Yin and Madame Shui, who were already waiting there, she burst into tears. The three women quickly hugged each other and cried together. The news of Ingzong and the officials' deaths naturally spread to the Yang family village. Qiao Yin and Madame Shui did not know how many times they had cried because of this. Yang Si and Yang Lu, who stayed at home, tried to persuade them, saying that no matter who was in trouble, the young master would be fine. However, this was only taken as comforting words. No one believed them. Even if others did not believe them, Yang Si and Yang Lu were not discouraged. Instead, they met up with the deputy chief of the Security Bureau, Yang San, who had been active in the capital. After a discussion, the three of them decided that before the young master returned, they had to protect the Yang family village and not allow anyone to cause trouble here. As for Yang Chendong's safety, the three of them did not worry too much about it. No one knew more about the sixth young master's background than they did. Even in the midst of chaos, it was really difficult to hurt the sixth young master with just tiger's mane, Beta Persei, Yang Wu, the first guard, and the 100 soldiers of the Cold Vanguard, led by Xiao Feng. It was because they firmly believed that Yang Chendong would be fine. The confidence of the three of them soared, and they secretly strengthened the security of the Yang family village. They even decided that if anyone dared to cause trouble here, they would be killed. At the same time, the three of them also decided to temporarily give up on the business of heaven beyond heaven and the immortal abode. They would invite all the important figures in the young master's eyes back to the Yang family village for protection. It was precisely this appropriate action that left some people disappointed, but it also left some people stamping with rage. The one who was stamping with rage was a member of the Yang family. It was Yang Chendong's second brother, Yang Rang. Just like how Wang Go had donated all his money to curry favor with Jining, Yang Rang had chosen to give his sixth brother's businesses, the immortal abode and heaven beyond heaven, to Jining. For this reason, he first went to the palace and handed over a letter of greeting stating his intentions. Jining was currently in a position of great power. She had to wait on Zhu Qiyu and curry his favor, and she also had to get rid of those who disobeyed her and deal with those who disobeyed her. He was just a trifling sixth-rank official. Wanting to see him was as difficult as ascending to the heavens. But when the eunuchs relayed Yang Rang's words, Jining was tempted. The immortal abode and heaven beyond heaven were reputed to be the most profitable businesses in the capital. There were even rumors that the great Ming dynasty's tax revenue couldn't compare to the amount of money earned from these two businesses. Jin Ying's eyes had long since turned red with envy. This was because Yang Chendong and Wang Zhen were on good terms. Even if she wanted to get her hands on them, she couldn't find the opportunity. Now, Yang Chendong's second brother wanted to give these two businesses to her. This was like a meat pie falling from the sky. Jean Ing immediately summoned Yang Rang in the midst of her busy schedule. When Yang Rang saw Jean Ing, he immediately knelt, looking like a servant meeting his master. It seemed like he wanted nothing more than to be Jean Ying's dog. Chapter 144. Jean Ing was naturally overjoyed by this attitude. After all, this person was the son of Yang Rong of the Three Yangs. Him treating him with such respect was definitely a sign of respect. He immediately put on a courteous front and helped Yang Rang to his feet. Afterwards, the host and guests sat together and chatted happily. Yang Rang's attitude was resolute. He had to give the realm beyond heaven and the immortal abode to Jean Ing. In response, Jean Ing expressed an appropriate amount of magnanimity. He agreed to take over these two properties, but he wouldn't treat Yang Rang unfairly. He said that he would give him 1/10 of the profits and let him manage them. All he needed to do was ensure the safety of the facilities. Yang Rang was overjoyed by the fact that this negotiation was not going to be taken seriously. After all, 1/10 of the profits was still a lot of money. At that moment, the two of them hit it off. In order to make Yang Rang's operation even smoother, Jean Ing even transferred 2 small banners of the embroidered uniform guards for him to use. Not only that, she also sent her servant, Zhao Xian, to cooperate with him. They had to get the deeds for these 2 places as soon as possible. Before the mission began, Yang Rang's official position was directly promoted from the 6th rank official of the Ministry of Rights to the 4th rank official of the Zhan Department. Although this position didn't have much authority, Jean Ing clearly stated that he could continue to be promoted after taking over the realm beyond heaven and the immortal abode. He was suddenly promoted from rank 6 to rank 4. This was a qualitative change. Yang Rang's eyes were filled with hope. He even believed that he would have to rely on himself to develop the Yang clan. As for whether or not he'd gotten everything, because he'd thrown in his lot with the eunuchs. Once he succeeded, who would care about asking so many questions? After leaving the imperial palace, the group of 20 headed straight for the immortal abode. However, when they came here excitedly, they were faced with a closed door. Let's go take a look at the realm beyond heaven. Yang Rang frowned. Everyone went to the neighboring heavens beyond, but it was the same here. It was empty. They could even see the emptiness of the interior through the transparent glass. There were no goods left, not even a guard was left behind. This gave Yang Rang a bad feeling. Although news of Ing Zong's defeat had already reached the capital, the new emperor had already ascended to the throne. There weren't any businesses that had closed because of this. Perhaps he had been affected a little, but it wasn't to the extent of not doing it anymore. What's going on? Zhao Xian, Jean Ying's servant, was also agitated by the scene in front of him and asked angrily. Yang Rang hurriedly bowed and revealed a flattering smile. It's fine, it's fine. They must be too cowardly and moved all the goods back to the Yang Qindong manor. We'll go there now. Don't worry, I'm Yang Qindong's second brother and the owner of that place. No one will dare to stop me. That better be the case. Zhao Xian snorted. Even without Zhao Xian saying anything, Yang Rang knew the importance of this matter. Jean Ing was interested in the benefits that the immortal abode and the heavens beyond heaven could bring her, not these 2 properties. Without the goods and services, these 2 places were not worth much. Yang Rang's forehead was already covered in cold sweat as he hurriedly led the group of people towards the Yang manor. In the Yang manor, it was as if they were facing a great enemy. Dao Xiao, who had been hiding in the shadows, had already led a small team of 10 people to the open and found a suitable location outside the manor. They were ready to destroy the enemy. In the manor, Yang Si and Yang Lu each held a 95 style sword and kept wiping it and checking their equipment. They knew that in the chaos, and with the young master not around, there would definitely be someone who had designs on the Yang manor. However, they did not know who it was. As they waited, a horse carriage entered Dao Zhao's line of sight. "Who are you?" "Stop the carriage. The Yang manor is in front. Unauthorized personnel are not allowed to enter." Dao Xiao jumped out from the bushes by the road and stood in the middle of the road. This was because it was only a horse carriage, and he could not see any danger. Otherwise, he would not have appeared so casually. "Stop!" The coachman shouted and stopped the carriage. Then, the coachman took off the felt hat on his head, revealing a young and valiant face. "Brother, I am Sun Chuang, a servant of minister, who from the Ministry of Rights. My young lady is in the carriage." Sun Chuang. Dao Xiao knew this name. As one of the captains of the young master's guards, he naturally had to be familiar with certain situations. This was to prevent a flood from flooding the Dragon King's temple. "Yes, you know me?" Sun Chuang looked at Dao Xiao with a suspicious gaze. As a captain of the embroidered uniform guards, even if he had never seen someone before, he would still have an impression of them. For example, he was sure that he had never met the person in front of him before. Facing Sun Chuang's question, Dao Xiao did not answer. Instead, he shook his head and said, "It is not important whether I know you or not. Who is in the carriage? Please open the curtain and take a look." "Who are you?" "I have been to the Yang manor a few times. Why have I not seen you before?" When Sun Chuang heard that he was going to open the curtain, his face revealed a sullen expression. In ancient times, when a young lady went out, she would not easily show her face to outsiders. Otherwise, where would the words reserved and well-bred come from? Seeing that Sun Chuang was questioning him, Dao Xiao replied with a cold laugh, "Forget it. Since you are not willing to open the curtain, please go back." After he finished speaking, he waved his hand, indicating for Sun Chuang to drive the carriage away from the Yang manor. "Wait." At this moment, a woman's voice came from the carriage. Then the window opened, revealing Hu Yan's peerless face. However, at this moment, her face was filled with anxiety. Her face was not as rosy as before, but rather pale. Who was Hu Yan? She was Yang Chendong's future wife candidate. As one of the captains of the guards, how could Dao Xiao not know her? When he raised his head and saw that it was indeed this young lady, he immediately lowered his head and clasped his hands together. "Sorry for the offense. This is a critical time. Please forgive me. You should go back quickly." After Dao Xiao knew who was in the carriage, he did not even have the courage to look at her. He no longer had the stern look he had before. Instead, he lowered his eyes and looked like a little wife who had been bullied. In Hu Yan's eyes, this performance actually caused her to unconsciously feel joy in her heart. These were the people by the Dong Shuai's side. They were always so respectful to her. They were even more respectful to her than the people in the Hu clan. "Officer Sun, drive the carriage." Hu Yan collected her thoughts and lowered the curtain. Then her voice rang out. Dao Xiao stepped aside to open the path behind him. When he turned around, he made a gesture that no one else could understand. However, Yang Si and Yang Lu, who were in the manor, saw it clearly. They knew that young mistress who had arrived. The door to the inner courtyard of the manor immediately opened. The carriage continued to move as usual. In the carriage, Xiao Qing hugged Hu Yan's arm tightly and said with a worried tone, "Young lady, we just left the Hu clan like this. Will Master be angry if he finds out?" "So what if he's angry? I was born to be the Dong Shuai's woman and die to be his ghost. If he wants me to go back, he can only do it as a corpse," Hu Yan said with a determined expression. Ever since Shiheng returned to the capital and news of Yingzhong and the hundreds of officials dying in battle spread, Hu Yan had shed countless tears. When she could no longer cry, she made a bold decision. She came to the Yang clan manor and lived here as Yang Chendong's wife. The two of them did not go through any ceremony. They did not even make any basic promises. When Yang Chendong left the capital, he did not even say goodbye. Logically speaking, when Hu Yan married someone else, she would not make any moral mistakes. However, she still made this decision. From this, it could be seen that she really liked Yang Chendong. She did not covet his ability to earn money and wanted to become a rich wife. In front of Xiaoqing, she expressed her attitude once again. Hu Yan thought of Sun Chuang and asked with a concerned tone, "Xiaoqing, you asked Officer Sun to send us out this time. Have you made plans for the future?" "I have." At this time, it was Xiaoqing's turn to reveal a determined expression. "I have already talked to him. In the future, we will follow Mississippi. As for whether Master will punish us or not, we will accept whatever the result is." This he was naturally referring to Sun Chuang. It was also because of love that Sun Chuang promised Xiaoqing to help her leave the Hu clan and come to the Yang clan manor. This was the result of love. However, at that time, this kind of love was not looked favorably upon. Sun Chuang also had another identity. He was the officer of the embroidered uniform guards and Hu Changning's personal servant. Based on the fact that he had a private relationship with Xiaoqing without his master's permission, even if he was killed at that time, no one would say anything. Xiaoqing's complexion was not very good. Although her words were very firm, her whole body seemed to be trembling. It could be seen that she was afraid. Hu Yan patted the back of her hand and said, "Xiaoqing, don't be afraid. Miss is here. If father punishes you, I will take responsibility." Mississippi, the touched Xiaoqing, was about to cry. She was not moved because Hu Yan was standing up for her. In fact, if something really happened as a miss, she could not help much. She was moved because Hu Yan's feelings for her were not like that of a servant girl, but like a sister. The two were hugging each other when the inner gate of the Yang clan manor opened. Qiaoyin, Madame Shui, and Yang Duo, who had heard the news, came out to welcome them. Madame Xiang was also in the backyard. Seeing these people coming out, her eyes were full of envy. Cui Na saw it clearly. "What, sister, are you envious?" "I'm envious," Lady Xiang replied without any hesitation. "Even if Dong Shui can't come back, or even if he is dead, do you still envy them? You are now a good girl and a virgin. If you want to marry in the future, you will not suffer too much." Cui Na knew that Madame Xiang liked the sixth young master, but had not been accepted. At that time, she felt injustice for her. Why could other people become Dong Shui's woman? What was the difference between Madame Xiang's appearance and figure? Chapter 145. But now, after learning that Yang Chendong might have died on the battlefield, she felt a little lucky for some reason. One of the advantages was that she didn't give herself to Dong Shui too early, but she didn't expect that Lady Xiang was still envious of Lady Shui and Lady Qiaoyin. No, Lady Shui shook her head firmly after hearing Cui Na's words. "You can't find a man as outstanding as Dong Shui in the whole world. Even if he's dead, I'm already his woman in Han Xiang's heart." As she spoke, her eyes couldn't stop tearing up. Obviously, it was too late for regrets at this moment. If she had known this would happen, she would have given herself to Dong Shui. It would have been better than regretting it for the rest of her life. Let's not talk about how the women would welcome Hu Yan and how they would cry when they saw each other. Let's talk about the group of people outside the Yang village. They were a group of unusual guests. The reason why they were said to be uninvited guests was because they all had excited expressions on their faces. Moreover, they didn't seem to have any intention of stopping when they entered the Yang Jia village. "Stop! The gate of the village opened, and Yang Si strode out to welcome them. While they were still far away, he fired the 95 style in his hand into the sky. Bang! The crisp sound immediately shocked the group from afar. Then, the sound of horses reining in their horses sounded one after another. From this point alone, it could be seen that people were afraid of death, especially those who seemed to be awe-inspiring. They often cherished their lives more and were the most timid. Yang Rang and Zhao Xian were riding at the front. The sudden gunshot really frightened them. They reined in their horses in a hurry and almost lost control of their bodies and fell from their horses. Twisting their bodies, they dismounted from their horses. Their faces were as unsightly as they could be. When Zhao Xian's feet finally landed safely on the ground, he pointed to the front with a flustered and exasperated face and said, "Who are they? How can they have firearms in their hands? Where are the laws of the great Ming dynasty?" It was no wonder that Zhao Xian was so angry. Firearms were important weapons of the imperial court, and they wouldn't be shown to people easily. Even the 3 firearm battalions were very strict with the management of firearms. Unless they had the special permission of the emperor and the Ministry of War, it was difficult for anyone to take them out. But now, this thing had unexpectedly appeared in the Yang village. How could they not be shocked, angry, and indignant? The more Yang rang, the more angry he was. But he didn't know these things. In order to calm Yang's anger, he kept nodding and said, "Mr. Zhao, don't be angry. I'll ask them what's going on." As he spoke, Yang Rang turned to look at Yang Si, who was standing at the entrance of the Yang family's inner courtyard with a firearm. Instead of acting like a grandson, he roared like a master. "Who are you? How dare you block our path? You know who I am? I'm Stings. What's the reason for entering the village without permission?" Facing the imposing Yang Rang, Yang Si naturally wasn't afraid. Even though he had already recognized that this person was the 6th young master's second brother. But at this time, he had brought so many embroidered uniform guards with him. His purpose was as clear as day. With regards to his own brother trying to steal the 6th young master's wife, he was no longer a member of the Yang family in his eyes. So why should he be polite? Yang Rang heard that he was just a servant, and it sounded so sarcastic. Since when did a servant dare to show off in front of his master? He didn't know how his 6th brother usually managed things. How could he not distinguish between master and servant? Humph! How dare a little servant hold a firearm? Let me tell you, you've already violated the laws of the great Ming dynasty. Now kneel and beg for mercy. For the sake of my 6th brother, I'll only kill you. I won't implicate the others in the village. Yang Rang seemed to be magnanimous, but unknowingly, he had already placed himself in the position of the head of the Yang family village. When the other servants heard their master's words, they must have been terrified and terrified. But this was Yang Si. He even beat up the messenger of the Walla. How could he shrink back because of these words? He first shook his head, and then with a trace of disdain in his eyes, he said, "First, how I got the firearm is none of your business. Second, a man can only live standing, not kneeling. Third, nothing will happen to the 6th young master, let alone die. Your so-called 6th brother is simply nonsense." The rebuttals entered his ears one by one. Zhao Xian's expression changed greatly, and he added fuel to the fire. "Master Yang, are these the servants of the Yang family? How can they be so rude?" Zhao Xian's words were like a heavy hammer, and Yang Rang's face was as red as a monkey's, but ever since he was a child, no one had ever insulted him like this since he learned that he was Yang Rong. But now, in front of a servant, and in front of a servant of the Yang family, he was being laughed at. How could he hold back his anger? Immediately, he looked at Yang Si with eyes that were spitting fire. As the second master of the Yang family, I order you to kneel and beg for mercy immediately. Otherwise, I'll exterminate 3 generations of your family. He even said something like exterminating 3 generations of his family. It could be seen how angry and hateful he was at this moment. If looks could eat people, Yang Si would have been eaten by Yang Rang countless times. Yang Rang roared furiously. At this time, Yang Rang did not look like a scholar at all. Looking at him, it really gave people a terrifying feeling. Yang Si was not an ordinary person, let alone an ordinary person. If shouting could make him submit, then Yang Qindong's previous hellish training would really be useless. At this moment, he was completely unfazed by Yang Rang's towering rage. He was still as calm and collected as ever, as if these words were not directed at him. He was just a bystander watching others put on a show. Seeing that Beta Persei was so angry, but the person opposite him did not have the slightest intention of retreating, Zhao Xian did not put his hopes on him. Instead, he turned to the brocade guards beside him and said, "Go, I'll leave this place to you. Since some people don't know what's good for them, there's no need to keep them." Zhao Xian's murderous intent was out, and he decided to suppress everything with bloody martial arts. Perhaps there were times when reasoning was useless. Whoever had the bigger fist would be the one who had the final say. However, the one who had the biggest fist was not Zhao Xian, but Yang Si, who held the 95 style. Ever since he followed Yang Qindong, he rarely had the chance to touch a gun. After all, once a gunshot was heard, it would inevitably attract the attention of all parties. Only when he really wanted to do it would he ask for leave from Tiger's Mane and go to Foul Crow Mountain Forest, which was more than 10 miles away from Yang Village, to shoot a few shots. And now, the opportunity to shoot was given to him. How could Yang Si not grasp it well? There was a hint of slyness in his eyes, and he revealed a playful expression. When he saw the brocade guards start to run towards him, he raised his hand and pulled the trigger with his finger. A crisp bang sound was heard. The second gunshot caused the embroidered uniform guards who were running forward to stop. Based on their instincts, they knew that there was danger ahead. What are you afraid of? He's only one person with a firearm. There are so many of you. How can that firearm fire continuously? Zhao Xian's shout came from behind. Although he was also very curious, he did not see Yang Si fill the gun with gunpowder and fire a second shot. However, relying on the fact that there were so many people, he still shouted with full confidence. His shout seemed to have given the embroidered uniform guards courage. Thinking that the opponent was indeed only one person with a firearm and that there were more than 20 of them, what was there to be afraid of? After looking at each other, they gathered their courage and continued to run forward. Yang Si's mouth slightly twitched. He was clearly very happy, but he still pretended to be helpless as he muttered, "You forced me to do this. Hee, then let's see who's stronger and see if there are people in this world who aren't afraid of death." The 95 style was raised, and it was a stark contrast to the previous frivolous attitude. At this moment, Yang Si was incomparably serious. His eyes were like an eagle's as he stared at the leg of the brocade guard running at the front. His right index finger lightly moved, and his shoulder was rebounded by the recoil of the firearm. In the next second, the bullet spun out of the barrel and accurately landed on the thigh of the brocade guard. Bang! The person fell. Their coordination was extremely synchronized. Bang, bang. After this shot, Yang Si fired 2 more bullets. 3 brocade guards fell to the ground one after another. Even though they fell to the ground, they did not forget to cry out in pain. At the same time, they rolled on the ground to show what kind of pain they were experiencing. This scene also frightened the others. At this moment, the brocade guards could not help but stop. Then it was unknown who took the lead, but after a shout, they all ran back in the direction of Zhao Xian. At this moment, Zhao Xian was also scared silly. He completely forgot to urge the brocade guards to continue their charge. This was the first time he saw a firearm that could fire continuously. Moreover, it was so accurate and so fast. All of this was beyond his understanding. The fleeing brocade guards returned to Zhao Xian's side. Then, they all looked at Yang Si with frightened eyes. It was as if he was a murderous demon. It made people afraid, terrified, and powerless. "How is it? Do you still want to charge?" Looking at the three people on the ground, Yang Si seemed to be very satisfied with his masterpiece. He even whistled happily. Then his face became serious again, and he said, "I already said that you are not allowed to charge into the Yang family manor. You just didn't listen. Now, this is the result of your own actions. Immediately take the injured people away and scram." Chapter 146. Yang Si raised his hand and fired again. The bullet hit the back of Zhao Xian's saber, and the powerful force sent the saber flying. This shot also completely woke Zhao Xian up. He was so scared that he knelt on the ground with a plop. At the same time, his whole body was trembling. Taking a closer look, his crotch was wet. This was what people called peeing. There was a distance of 60 steps. Not only could the firearm hit, but it also hit with such precision. This made the other embroidered uniform guards completely deflate. At the same time, they finally knew what kind of person they were facing. Just now, they wanted to win with numbers. If it wasn't for this person showing mercy, they didn't know if any of them would be able to return alive. "What are you looking at? Why aren't you taking the injured people away? Do you want to see them die?" Yang Si saw that the enemy had been scared out of their wits and let out a fierce roar. This roar gave all the embroidered uniform guards a big fright. At the same time, it made them run forward again. They picked up their three injured companions who were still rolling on the ground and retreated. The shot that hit the saber completely extinguished Zhao Xian's arrogance. No one would have thought that when he finally left, he would actually bow and smile as he retreated step by step. Perhaps he had done too many bad things and was worried that Yang Si would suddenly appear behind him and take his life. When the group came, they were aggressive. But when they left, they were dejected, creating a sharp contrast. Only when they were some distance away from the Yangjia Manor's gate did Zhao Xian and the other embroidered uniform guards sit on the ground with a plop, gasping for breath. Thinking back to the scene, just now, it was like taking a trip to the gates of hell. To be able to return alive, it was the accumulated merit of their ancestors, who knew how long they had been gasping for. After finally calming down, Yang Rang asked Zhao Xian with lingering fear, "Mr. Zhao, what should we do next? He has such a powerful firearm in his hand. It seems that we won't be a match for him. Why don't we bring more people? Like you said, they only have one firearm. We have more people. As long as we rush in front of them, victory will be ours." "Forget it. There is something fishy about this matter. I have to report it to Eunuch before making a decision." Zhao Xian shook his head. He saw how powerful the 9-5 was, and because of this, he became greedy. He thought about how powerful such a good firearm would be if he could get his hands on it. At that time, if anyone was dissatisfied with him, he would just raise his head and shoot them. No matter how powerful a person was, they would not be a match for this thing. Zhao Xian had the thought of pocketing for himself, so he naturally would not let others know. In order to appease Yang Rang, he deliberately said, "Master Beta Persei, you can go back first. I will report everything that happened to my father-in-law. You just have to wait for the news." Oh, Yang Rang did not doubt him. After all, Zhao Xian was Jin Ying's servant. They had a close relationship. Since Zhao Xian had said so, he could only choose to believe him. The two parted ways after entering the outer city of the capital. Zhao Xian did indeed go to see his master, Jining, but he did not tell her what had happened. He only said that because they had suffered a defeat, the people of the immortal abode were extremely afraid. They needed some time to calm down before they could do business as usual and earn money again. He would follow up on this matter. Perhaps Jining trusted her servant Zhao Xian completely, or perhaps it was because she had too much work to do. In any case, she believed his words and did not ask any further questions. After leaving, Zhao Xian immediately began to search for some ruffians in the city. There was no lack of desperados among these people. As long as they were given enough money and benefits, there was nothing they did not dare to do. In just 2 days, Zhao Xian had gathered a group of nearly 50 people. After promising that if they went to the Yang family manor to retrieve something, each person would receive 100 taels of silver, these people all followed his lead and were willing to listen to his arrangements. In order to achieve a surefire success, Zhao Xian decided to take action at night. That afternoon, he led these people out of the southern part of the city to make preparations for the operation at night, just when he thought that no one knew what he was doing, and was even thinking of offering the weapon to his master, Jining. The benefits he would receive would not be small. The people of the Security Bureau had been watching his every move for the past few days. As soon as they left the city gates, the news was reported to the deputy director, Yang San. As the deputy director, he was actually the leader of the Security Bureau. After training, Yang San had become much more mature, both mentally and mentally. As soon as he received the news, he quickly analyzed that this was a sign that Zhao Xian was about to make a move. After injuring the 3 embroidered uniform guards, the Yang clan manor had entered a state of emergency. They had even prepared for a large group of embroidered uniform guards to attack the manor. Under Yang San, Yang Si, and Yang Lu's joint plan, they even prepared a rocket launcher, a highly destructive weapon, just in case. Unexpectedly, for the past 2 days, it had been very peaceful outside the manor. After investigation, they found out that Zhao Xian had other plans. He probably did not report the situation truthfully to his master, Jining. This could be seen from the fact that he had privately spent a lot of money to move the 3 injured embroidered uniform guards together for treatment. He wanted to hide something and wanted to play a big game of chess. But what did he want to do? Yang San and the others were only suspicious. All they did was send people to keep an eye on him. Now that there was finally news as the deputy director, he slapped his thigh and said, "This Zhao Xian's appetite is not small. He wants to destroy the Yang clan manor privately, but he doesn't know how much weight he has." Yang San was really angry. He had clearly seen the power of firearms, but he still wanted to bring 50 people to attack the manor. How bold was he? He must have thought that the Yang clan manor only had one such advanced and powerful firearm. It must be so. Even though his thoughts were so childish, he still dared to have such ambition. Such a person could not be left alive. Yang San immediately made the decision to take the initiative to attack and get rid of Zhao Xian and his group. He also hurriedly sent his suggestion to Yang Si and Yang Lu, 60 miles northeast of Shangshi Yuzhou. A group of people was resting in the mountains. In order to prevent others from discovering their tracks, they did not even dare to start a fire. In the mountains, from a high vantage point, one could see the official road and the majestic Zijing Pass not far away. Naturally, they saw the Walla army knocking on the pass. Why are there enemies here? Could it be that our great Ming has fallen into the hands of the enemy? In the crowd, Zhu Qizhen, who was wearing a tiger's armor, looked very miserable with his hair disheveled. At this moment, when he saw the Walla army that was breaking through the pass, there was a hint of fear and worry between his brows. Ever since he was saved by Yang Qindong, Zhu Qizhen's courage had become much smaller. Along the way, he encountered a few small Walla teams. The scene of them fighting and killing the enemy made him see the fragility of human life. Even though they were all killed by the cold front led by Xiao Feng from a distance, every time they cleaned up the battlefield, when they walked up and saw the various miserable conditions of the corpses, it still hammered his heart time and time again. In the imperial court, in the palace, he would sometimes receive military reports saying that there was a rebellion at a certain place, that there was an enemy at a certain place, and that many soldiers had died in the process. But that was just a number that was forgotten after hearing it. How could it have such a deep impression? He had seen too many scenes and seen too many dead people. Zhu Qizhen secretly decided that he would just obediently stay in the palace in the future. It was more appropriate to leave the matters of war to the generals. An emperor who was skilled in both the pen and the sword sounded good, but it was not so easy to do it. Most importantly, he was not made for this. Along the way, Zhu Qizhen saw himself more clearly. This was something that Yang Qindong did not expect. With history already beginning to change, no one knew if this change in Zhu Qizhen's mental state was good or bad. It was also because of Zhu Qizhen that this group did not travel very quickly. This was especially true after passing through Yuzhou and getting closer and closer to the capital. This was not because he was afraid of returning home. It was simply because he knew that he was safe. As the emperor, Zhu Qizhen had begun to put on airs. In the absence of any threat to his life, his body began to rebel and display various signs of discomfort. As he walked faster, his body began to develop all sorts of small problems. They were no longer on the run, so no one could forcefully do anything to the emperor. They could only carefully accompany him. However, they had only traveled less than 100 miles in 3 days, and this was under the condition that they were riding on healthy horses. This ant-like crawling speed made Yang Qindong extremely anxious. In the battle of the Tumu fortress, Yang Qindong did not interfere too much, or perhaps it could be said that he did not have the authority or opportunity to interfere too much. Only when the situation was settled and chaos descended did he strike with lightning speed to complete his plan. Yang Qindong, who had long known what would happen, had calculated everything beforehand and made all his arrangements come into use. At present, everything seemed to be going according to plan, and everything seemed to be going smoothly. But Zhu Qizhen's speed was truly beyond his expectations. If this continued, it would take at least 7 or 8 days, perhaps even longer, to reach the capital. He had always been worried about the safety of the people in the Yang clan manor, so he decided that he could not wait any longer. He had to strike ahead of time. Passively waiting had never been something that Yang Qindong was willing to do. Even though the Yang clan manor had Yang Si, Yang Lu, Dao Xiao, and the others, as well as the Phantom Sniper Squad in the shadows, they were still a force to be reckoned with. With these people, unless an army invaded, ordinary attacks would not be able to harm them. But there was always an exception. History had long ago proven that unexpected things would happen from time to time. In order to avoid the possibility of an accident, he needed to return to the capital as quickly as possible. Chapter 147. Your Majesty, it has been nearly half a month since we left the Tumu Castle. We have been very safe with the protection of the mercenaries. But after all, outsiders don't know our situation, and in order to avoid being hunted down by the Walla, we deliberately did not get in touch with the outside world. Now that so much time had passed, the situation in the capital was truly worrisome. I will be the vanguard and return to the capital first to tell the officials that Your Majesty is fine, so they can be at ease and stabilize the court. After thinking about it again and again, Yang Qindong finally decided to leave first and did not travel with Zhu Qizhen, who was crawling like a snail. Yes, we need someone to report back in advance. Although Zhu Qizhen's body was not in good condition, and he did not have enough exercise, his head was not injured, and he was still very clear-headed at this time. He naturally knew that the news of him being fine had to be reported back first. Otherwise, who knew what would happen after a long time? But it was very important who to send back. After all, these powerful mercenaries were invited by Yang Qindong. If he was not there, who could take care of the situation if there was a problem? It was not easy to escape the claws of the Walla, but if they became a pawn in the hands of these mercenaries, they would not be able to find a place to cry. Zhu Qizhen agreed to send someone back to inform, but it seemed that he did not agree with Yang Qindong's return. The Minister of War, Kuang Yi, and the Minister of Revenue, Wang Zhuo, looked at each other and immediately understood. This time, it was because of Yang Qindong that their lives were saved. It could be called a great kindness. And now, it was time to repay the kindness. Immediately, the two of them knelt on the ground at the same time and said to Zhu Qizhen, "Your Majesty, we agree with Yang Qindong's request, but for the sake of justice, we ask the benefactor to reward Yang Qindong for his great merit in this matter, and ask Your Majesty to reward him." "Your Majesty, please reward him." The other 7 officials who reacted were also awakened by this kneeling and immediately knelt on the ground to beg. This kneeling was to thank Yang Qindong for saving their lives, but at the same time, it was also for themselves. Thinking about it, if Yang Qindong could be conferred a title, then the 9 of them would at least be rewarded for their hard work. At the very least, he would be given the title of a loyal subject, which could be used as a condition for promotion in the future. Of course, there was a precondition to all of this, and that was that Yang Qindong, who had made the greatest contribution, had obtained the benefits first. Otherwise, how could they ask for credit? As soon as the 9 ministers knelt, Zhu Qizhen immediately felt like he was the emperor. Feeling smug, he nodded his head and said, "That's right. Everyone is right. This time, Yang Shima has indeed performed meritorious service in protecting His Majesty and deserves to be heavily rewarded. In that case, I will confer Yang Qindong the title of Loyal and Courageous Count with a salary of 1,100 stones. He will be able to command the troops in brocade clothes and will be given a certificate. The Ming dynasty had always had a rule that those who did not contribute to the country and the military were not allowed to be bestowed with titles. This time, Yang Qindong had saved the emperor and 9 important ministers. This was definitely a military merit, and he deserved this title. "Thank you, Your Majesty." After receiving the reward, Yang Qindong immediately knelt down to thank the emperor. "Your Majesty is wise." Kuang Yi, Wang Zhuo, and the other important ministers also knelt down one by one, thanking the emperor for his wisdom. Yang Qindong was conferred the title of Count, which was equivalent to receiving a very heavy reward. Then, would their rewards be far away? "Everyone, please rise." Zhu Qizhen's face was filled with satisfaction. He liked the feeling of being bowed to 3 times and kowtowed to 9 times. This made him feel the prestige of being an emperor. However, after a smile, he also expressed his intention to send Yang Qindong back to the capital. Otherwise, why would he let him be the commander of the brocade guards? This was an official position in the upper echelons of the brocade guards. With this status, it would be much more convenient for him to move about the capital. With the title of Count, Yang Qindong was no longer the crown prince's steed, but the Count of Loyalty and Courage. At this moment, he stood up and once more requested that he return to the capital first to make arrangements. "Okay, we approve. Count of Loyalty and Courage. Which minister do you need to go with you?" After making his decision, Zhu Qizhen began to consider who to send into the capital. In his view, Yang Qindong was still a little too light. This person had only been a fifth-rank official in the past, and he had only recently been conferred the title of Count of Loyalty and Courage. No one knew that sending him back would be very inconvenient. Zhu Qizhen had his own thoughts, and after saying this, he turned his gaze to the other 9 ministers. These 9 were all civil officials, and only Kuang Yi was the Minister of War. However, he was already very old, and it would be inappropriate for him to be in a hurry. Thus, none of them dared to meet the emperor's gaze. However, Yang Qindong had seen the reactions of his ministers, and he had never planned on bringing anyone back. After all, after returning to the capital, there were many things that he might not do according to the rules. Thus he clasped his hands and said, "Your Majesty, in this subject's view, we shouldn't have the other ministers accompany us. They are all exhausted from the journey. I want to bring the least amount of people back to the capital as quickly as possible. I'm afraid that the ministers' bodies won't be able to take it. If something happens along the way, it will be difficult to deal with it. Why don't the subject go alone? Your Majesty only needs to write an edict for this subject. This way, it will be easier to gain the trust of others, and it will also let everyone know that Your Majesty is well." Seeing that none of the 9 ministers took the initiative to step forward, and that Yang Qindong's words made sense, Zhu Qizhen pondered for a moment before saying, "All right, since that's the case, do you have pen and paper? We will write an edict to reward the Count of Loyalty and Courage and ask him to write a letter for the Count of Loyalty and Courage to bring it to Empress Dowager Sun and Empress Qian. Come, bring me pen and ink." Yang Qindong signaled to Beta Persei with his eyes. Beta Persei immediately responded, and then took out the pen, ink, paper, and inkstone that he had prepared in advance from the bag behind him. In such an environment, Yang Qindong was still able to bring these seemingly useless things. It had to be said that he was really considerate. Everything was prepared, and the Minister of Revenue, Wang Zhuo, personally ground the ink. Soon, Zhu Qizhen personally finished writing an edict and a letter to the harem. Yang Qindong held the letter with the ink still wet and named more than 30 people. Among them were the first guard, Qiu Vi, Tiger's Mane, Beta Persei, and others who had been hiding in the cold front. Only Xiao Feng and 70 people were left behind, and Yang Wu was left behind to protect the emperor. Before leaving, Yang Qindong deliberately gave Xiao Feng a look that no one else knew. Even if Xiao Feng was a mercenary and came for money, that was, anyone who had money could use it. With Yang Qindong's understanding of Zhu Qizhen, he would definitely contact Xiao Feng if he had such an opportunity. He didn't do so before because of his face. Now that he had left, some words could naturally be said. This was probably the main reason why Zhu Qizhen agreed to let Yang Qindong go first. The night was dark and windy. It was the perfect time to kill. The night was not bad. There was wind, but it wasn't strong. It was so dark that one couldn't even see one's fingers. This kind of night was the best time to do some evil deeds. Zhao Xian slowly moved towards the Yang village with the 50 men who were willing to die that he had recruited with a large sum of money. Although Zhao Xian was Jin Ying's servant, he was an ambitious person. He wanted to act alone and obtain great merit. Once he obtained the firearm that could fire continuously and accurately, he would be able to present it to his master, Jin Ying. It would only be a matter of time before he would be blessed with great fortune. He naturally had his reasons for not reporting this to his superiors and not mobilizing a large number of embroidered uniform guards. Firstly, he was afraid that the merit would be divided. Secondly, he was worried that if too many people appeared and caused too much of a commotion, the other party would eventually destroy the exquisite firearm. If that was the case, there was no need to mobilize a large force just to destroy Yang village without their master, Yang Qindong. With the idea of obtaining great merit, Zhao Xian and the 50 people moved toward Yang village in the dark night. As they moved forward, they didn't pay much attention to concealment and formation. After all, they were at least 10 li away from Yang village. The night was so dark that they couldn't think of any reason for them to be discovered or be in danger. However, they didn't know that 3 li ahead, at a fork in the road that led to Yang village, the ghost sniper squad was waiting for them. After receiving the news that Zhao Xian was going to act, the Yang village was in an uproar. What others didn't expect was that the focus of the argument was actually who would lead the troops. The strength of an army depended on its morale. Even if it was a well-trained army, it would only be a defeated army when its morale was completely gone. Previously, there was no lack of elite troops from the Ming dynasty in the Tumu Castle. Many of them were even left behind by the Ming dynasty's Emperor Zhu Di. However, after losing their morale, weren't they still unable to withstand a single blow? Not to mention how hard the Yangtze's new army trained, and the price they had to pay to become a qualified cold vanguard. In terms of morale, no one could compare. Among them, the fiercest were the Second Guard's Captain Dao Xiao and the Ghost Sniper Squad's Captain Bai Zhua. The two of them led a team of 10 and 20 people, respectively. In Yang Chendong's eyes, they were the elites of the elites. They were two sharp fists. Now that there was a mission, these two fists wanted to attack. They wanted to obtain merit and perform better. However, in the end, the one who won was Captain Bai Zhua. It was not for anything else but because before Yang Chendong left, he had said that he had some secret things to do. The first was the Ghost Sniper Squad. This was because this was a hidden army that could attack the enemy from a long distance and not be discovered. The so-called hidden army referred to the fact that they could achieve the goal of being invisible to a certain extent. Before others could discover them, they would be eliminated. Chapter 148. This time, dealing with Zhao Xian was a secret mission. Mobilizing the Ghost Shadow Sniper Squad was the most appropriate move for this kind of mission. When Bai Zhuo mentioned the 6th young master's message, Dao Xiao had no choice but to lower his head. The advantage of the guards was in their defense. They could even block bullets for their master in times of danger. Loyalty was a must. However, they did not have the ability to wipe out the enemy in an instant. The equipment in their hands made it very difficult for them to accomplish this goal. In the end, Bai Zhuo won the mission, and Yang Lu followed to supervise the completion of the mission. The final result still required him to personally report to Yang Chendong. This was one of the privileges of a servant. This was the meaning of the phrase, a 7th-rank official in front of the prime minister. After receiving the mission, Bai Zhuo left in high spirits. Not long after, he brought his 20 team members and Yang Lu, a total of 22 people, to the fork in the road. According to their previous discussion, even if Zhao Xian and the others appeared here, as long as their goal was not in the direction of Yangjia village, they should not touch him. After all, the 6th young master was not here. It was better to avoid unnecessary trouble. In other words, although Bai Zhuo had made preparations, the final choice was still in Zhao Xian's hands. As long as he was not greedy, death could still be avoided. However, since Zhao Xian had seen the power of the new firearms and had made preparations for a few days, how could he not make a move on Yangjia village? Therefore, when Zhao Xian led more than 50 people to the fork in the road, he did not hesitate at all and chose the direction that led to the Yang village. The moment they took the first step, they were destined to meet a tragic end. In order to complete this mission, Bai Zhuo had brought the most advanced weapons and equipment. Needless to say, the sniper rifle had a shooting range of up to 2 kilometers. At the same time, it was equipped with extremely advanced night vision goggles, which ensured that the light in the field of vision was not too different from the light in the day. It was still possible to see every movement of the target clearly and even every hair on their body. Under these conditions, one could imagine what awaited Zhao Xian and the others. The silhouettes of Zhao Xian and the others appeared clearly in the scope. These men in black seemed to be using the darkness of the night to disguise themselves, but in fact, every movement was magnified and could be seen clearly. Even the slight change in their eyes could be seen clearly. Ready, 3, 2, 1. Fire. As the captain, Bai Zuo was very calm at this time. Unlike the other teammates, he didn't need a spotter. Even though Yang Lu was crawling beside him, he was only here to observe the situation and wouldn't help anyone. Bai Zuo didn't need a spotter. He was still comparable to any group of subordinates. When he gave the order to shoot, according to the attack plan, the men in black walking in the last row became the first targets to be shot. Swish, 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 swish. Under the silencer, several flames suddenly appeared, followed by the sound of 11 black-clothed men falling to the ground, followed by the swollen bodies. One of them didn't get hit in the vitals because the silencer would change the aerodynamic efficiency of the bullet when it was fired. This would change the speed and direction of the bullet, which would affect the sniping distance and shooting accuracy. Since he wasn't hit in the vitals, he didn't die immediately. Instead, he struggled and screamed in pain. In such a dark night, the sudden, miserable screams immediately attracted the other black-clothed men to hide in all directions like birds startled by the twang of a bow. In a situation where they did not know what had happened, there were even some who directly fell to the ground. It could be seen that they were indeed frightened. In an era where ordinary firearms were considered the most advanced firearms, the sniper rifle was something that many people had never seen before. There were no signs of life. Just a few flames lit up, and people fell to the ground dead. To the ancients who did not know anything about technology, this was no different from seeing a ghost. It made their bodies tremble, and at the same time, their hearts were also trembling. Once the order to shoot was given, the attack wouldn't stop unless all the enemies were eliminated. Even if these people were trembling and feeling fear from the depths of their souls, it couldn't change their fate at all. The flashes of light were like the fluttering of the world, dazzling and eye-catching. What followed was the men in black being killed on the ground one after another. No matter where they hid, whether they were standing, squatting, or lying down, it didn't change their fate of death. After the flashes of light, after only 5 rounds, only Zhao Xian was left on the battlefield. It wasn't that he hid well, nor was it that he was lucky. Leaving him alive was originally Yang Lu's request. More than 50 people were handed over to the Ghost Shadow Sniper team, leaving one person for himself to kill. This was the result that Yang Lu came to after discussing with Bai Zuo. They didn't want no one to know of their existence when they first appeared. Even if Zhao Xian was destined to die, it was also a kind of glory for him to know who killed him before he died. Originally, there was a group of living people around him. Although these people had cold expressions and even had a murderous aura in their eyes, they were still living people after all. It wasn't like now, where the surroundings were filled with a deathly aura and the smell of fresh blood assailed his nostrils. Zhao Xian felt as if he was living in hell. There was only deathly aura around him. Just as his eyes kept turning and his mind was blank, frightened by the scene in front of him, Yang Lu appeared from a bush and walked out. Who are you? Let me tell you, my master is Lord Jining. If you dare to kill me, he will definitely not let you go. Feeling a black shadow creeping towards him in the distance, Zhao Xian's lips kept trembling as he tried to threaten the other party with a trembling voice. He was a fish on the chopping block. At this moment, Zhao Xian's voice was so weak and pale that it didn't pose the slightest threat to Yang Lu, who was getting closer and closer. With steady steps, Yang Lu walked step by step like a heavy hammer pounding on the soul. He arrived in front of Zhao Xian and raised the broadsword in his hand high. "Kid, I'll give you a benefit before you die. I'll let you be a ghost that knows the truth. Since you've offended the sixth young master, death is your only fate." You're from the Yang village? No, that's impossible. Your master is already dead, and you still dare to offend Lord Jining. You're all destined to die. At this moment, Zhao Xian finally regained his senses and realized Yang Lu's identity. He then shouted hysterically. Unfortunately, no matter how much he shouted, he couldn't change the outcome. As Yang Lu raised his broadsword high and brought it down, a bloody head flew into the air. Zhao Xian was dead. When he died, his widened eyes seemed to express the unwillingness in his heart. He finally knew how powerful the Yang village was. He knew that the Yang village had more than one powerful firearm. He knew that the Yang village was not to be trifled with, and was powerful. If he had another chance to choose, he definitely wouldn't have brought his men to the Yang village to steal the credit. Instead, he would have brought a large group of embroidered uniform guards to the Yang village. He didn't believe that the people of the Yang village would dare to resist against the embroidered uniform guards. Zhao Xian really didn't understand the people of the Yang village. They were soldiers of the new era and were particular about obeying orders. As long as it was an order from Yang Chendong, even if they knew that there was a sea of fire in front of them, no one would frown when advancing. Even if the Imperial Secret Service really came, what they needed to do was to actively counterattack without the slightest hesitation. Zhao Xian was dead. He died without any signs of life. As the master, Jining didn't know at all. He really had too many things to do. Wang Zhen still had many remaining supporters to deal with. After all, Wang Zhen had covered the sky with one hand all these years. Whether it was in the palace or outside, he had accumulated too much power. It would take a lot of time to get rid of them. Other than Wang Zhen, there were many people who had to be dealt with in time. Before Zhu Qizhen left the capital, he had ordered Zhu Qiyu to stay in the capital. The court affairs would be handled by Jining, another eunuch, Xing, and the Minister of Personnel, Wang Zhi, and the Prince Consort, Jiao Jing. Wang Zhi and Jiao Jing were easy to deal with. When faced with an extreme situation, the first thing a scholar would think of was self-preservation. As long as he didn't threaten the lives and interests of these people, they would stay put and watch everything with the attitude of watching a tiger fight from the top of a mountain. Xing, on the other hand, had first served Empress Dowager Sun, then Empress Qian. With the Empress's support, he wasn't easy to deal with. Moreover, they were all eunuchs, so it was easy for them to guess each other's thoughts. As for the Xing, an eunuch, Jining wanted to negotiate first. Although Zhu Qiyu had already ascended the throne and become the substitute emperor, it was clear that he still respected his sister-in-law. If he made a move against Empress Qian's people, he had no idea what would happen if he was sued. It was precisely because of Wang Zhenyu's faction and Xing Yan's presence that Jining completely forgot about her servant Zhao Xian. 4 days later, everyone in Wang Zhenyu's faction had been captured and killed. Aside from those who had escaped, most of them had been eliminated. Moreover, the negotiations with Xing Yan had gone smoothly. Everyone had reached an agreement to mind their own business. Only then did he remember the matter of the immortal abode and sky beyond heaven. He immediately ordered someone to find Zhao Xian. After learning that Zhao Xian hadn't appeared for several days, he summoned the second master of the Yang clan, Yang Rang. He wanted to ask when these properties would become his. The palace eunuchs came to Yang Rang's residence and led him into the palace. Yang Rang's face lit up with joy. Chapter 149. He did not know that Zhao Xian had already gone to hell. He thought that he had succeeded and that Jining was going to reward him. He did not forget that the eunuch in charge had said that there would be more benefits for him. He was still looking forward to being promoted and getting rich. Yang Rang came to the palace with a trace of anticipation and excitement. The moment he saw Jining, he knelt on the ground without any bottom line and kept saying auspicious things about Jining. "All right, Lord Yang, please get up." A satisfied smile hung on Jin Ying's face. What he loved the most was to see those high and mighty so-called pillars of the country, the aristocratic families, kneel down and salute him. It gave him a great sense of accomplishment. Yang Rang thanked him profusely and stood up again. Then he stood there respectfully with a bashful smile on his face. "Lord Yang, this time I called you here to ask you, do you know where Zhao Xian is now? And what happened when you went to the Yang village that day?" Jin Ying's question made Yang Rang's heart tremble. He had thought that the matter had been resolved. Unexpectedly, it was not the case at all. Zhao Xian had actually disappeared. For a moment, while he was surprised, he recounted everything that had happened at the Yang village that day. At first, Jining listened carefully. However, the more he listened, the more complicated his expression became. As the master, he knew very well what kind of person Zhao Xian was. He was a person who rejoiced in grandiose achievements. It was only because he was very loyal to him that he was still used by him. Thinking that now that he had great power in his hands, he thought that the matter that was given to him would not go wrong. However, he had never imagined that things would turn out like this. He had a feeling that Zhao Xian's life was in danger, and that this matter must have something to do with the Yang village. "Lord Yang, you said that when you went that day, the servants of the Yang village had an unknown firearm, and that it was very powerful. Is that so?" Jin Ying thought of the crux of the matter. This was probably the result of Zhao Xian's selfishness. "That's right, eunuch Jin. Those firearms are very powerful. Not only do they have great lethality, but they are also very accurate. Most importantly, those firearms can fire continuously. It's not something that our great firearms camp can compare with. When I saw it, I was also very curious." All right. Jin Ying's expression darkened as she interrupted Yang Rang's boastful speech. "I know what happened. You can go back first." Jin Ying waved her hand. She didn't have time to waste on Yang Rang. Her mind was filled with questions about where these advanced firearms had come from and who had given the Yang family servants the courage to confront the brocade guards. Yes, Yang Rang saw that Jining was a little unhappy and prepared to leave. But when he retreated, he thought of something and said aloud, "By the way, that servant is Yang Si, who beat up the Walla messenger not long ago. Qian, Sung Bao even went to find trouble with him." I know. Jining nodded. After Yang Si withdrew, he immediately ordered people to call for the brocade guards who had followed Zhao Xian to the Yang village that day. At the same time, he also called for Qian Sun Bao to ask about Yang Si. Soon, 3 injured brocade guards were brought over and confirmed that Yang Rang's words were true. Not long after, Qian Sun Bao also rushed over. Qian Sun Bao didn't dare to refuse Jin Ying's summons. Now, anyone could see that this person had great power and influence. His superior, the head eunuch of the Imperial Horse Directorate, Chun Guan, had been imprisoned even though he tried to curry favor with Wang Zhenyu's faction. If he performed well and was promoted, it wouldn't be a problem for him to become the head eunuch of the Imperial Horse Directorate. All of this depended on Jin Ying's attitude. "Greetings, eunuch Jin." When Qian Sung Bao appeared, he was very respectful to Jin Ying. His eyes were full of flattery. When a person can decide your future and fate, it is very difficult for you to appear as an equal in front of him. Eunuch Qian, let me ask you, what is the matter with Yang Si? Jin Ying didn't have any intention of exchanging pleasantries. They had all been in the palace for many years, so he understood Wang Zhenyu's personality better than anyone else. When Wang Zhenyu had been in power, Wang Zhenyu hadn't even looked at him. Now that he had power, Wang Zhenyu wanted to curry favor with him. This was the nature of people. Yang Si, Qian Songbao, was rather confused by this question. He did his best to search for this name, but he didn't come up with anything. Yang Si of the Yang clan, a servant of my Yang, Jining reminded him, impatience on his face. Oh, I remember now. That Yang Si once beat up the guard captain of the Walla emissary, Tuj, at the gate of the immortal abode. Because this matter involved diplomatic matters, the higher-ups gave me the task, and I had Tang Tong of the Brocade Guard go to the Yang clan to demand for him. It was said that he had already left the capital and gone to the Yang clan's Janning residence. Later on, because of the conflict between the Walla and our great Ming, no one asked about this matter anymore. Qian Songbao was also confused as he answered the question. He didn't understand why Lao Jining was so concerned about a mere fifth-rank servant. He went to the Yang clan's residence. Humph! Let me tell you, a few days ago, he publicly injured 3 of my embroidered uniform guards who went to Yang village to enforce the law. Not only that, but my servant, Zhao Xian, has also disappeared. I suspect that this has a lot to do with Yang Si. As Jining spoke, he let out a soft snort, expressing the dissatisfaction in his heart. Something like that happened. Qian Songbao had truly been shocked by this matter, putting aside the fact that no one in the world dared to openly oppose the Brocade Guard. Just the disappearance of Jin Ying's servant was a major matter. Based on this, the Yang village was doomed this time. After knowing Jin Ying's intentions, Qian Songbao understood what he had to do next. He immediately took the initiative and said, "Don't worry, Eunuch Jin. I will bring some people to the Yang clan and bring the criminal over. At the same time, I will search the place to see if I can find Zhao Xian's whereabouts." Very good. Seeing that Qian Songbao understood his intentions, Jin Ying's expression eased. Go ahead, but you must be vigilant. There is news that the other party has a new type of firearm with great destructive power. You must bring more people with you. Also, bring Mao Mu with you. In the past, when Wang Zhen communicated with the Yang clan, he relied on this person. Let him reason things out first. It's best not to make a move if possible. Of course, Jining wasn't someone who bemoaned the state of the universe and pitted the fate of mankind. He didn't have the slightest intention of being soft-hearted when it came to the lives of the Yang clan people. He was worried that the advanced firearm would be destroyed, so he wanted to use the method of peace talks to resolve the matter. Qian Songbao left after receiving his orders. As he instructed someone to find Tang Tong, Qian Hu, and have him wait outside the palace with his men, he walked straight to where Mao Mu was resting. Mao Mu was the last-ranked eunuch in the ceremony directorate. Previously, he had been living a very glorious life, but now he was like a rat on the street, hated by everyone. Speaking of eunuchs, there were too many differences between them and ordinary people. Their jealousy was several times greater than that of ordinary people. The thing they couldn't stand the most was others having a good time. Perhaps it was because of their bodies, but they were more passionate about power and money. Whenever they had the chance, they would always try to get some benefits for themselves. And when they had the chance to step on others, they wouldn't be soft-hearted at all. Previously, because of Yang Qindong's support, Mao Mu had been promoted several times, from a small eunuch leader to a large eunuch leader. As his status changed, he, who represented the diapers, earned a lot of money. For a period of time, Other than Wang Zhen, few people dared to give him any face. But with the defeat at the front lines and the news of Ingzong and hundreds of officials dying in battle, Mao Mu's good days came to an end. There was no one to protect him. What followed was the jealousy of all the eunuchs. Almost everyone with some ability came to him to take advantage of him. Seeing that the situation wasn't good, Mao Mu was decisive. First, he gave most of the money he had saved to Jining, drawing a clear line between him and Wang Zhen. Then, he used the rest of the money to get rid of the other eunuchs who came to make trouble for him. For a time, it could be said that he spent money like it was dirt. Only then did he manage to keep his position. Even so, his authority was no longer what it used to be. In addition, something had happened to Yang Chendong. Now, he couldn't even find a source of diapers. He was completely empty-handed. All day long, he sighed in the palace. He only hated his bad fate. He had just met a wise master, and it hadn't been long before an accident happened. He really didn't know what to do. Just as he was shaking his head and sighing in his room, the door was pushed open. The supervising eunuch of the Imperial Horse Directorate, Qian Sengbao, walked in. When he saw Qian Sengbao, Mao Mu immediately climbed down from his bed. "I didn't know that Eunuch Qian was coming. Please forgive me for not coming out to meet you." Looking at the awe-inspiring Mao Mu 10 days ago, seeing him being so respectful now, Qian Sengbao was very pleased. "Eunuch Mao, Eunuch Jin has an errand for us to do. Pack up and come with me." Okay. As Mao Mu spoke, he turned and opened a cabinet at the head of his bed. He took out 200 taels of silver and handed it to Qian Sengbao. "Eunuch Qian, this is the last of my wealth. Although it isn't much, it is a token of my sincerity. Please accept it. 200 taels of silver really wasn't much. At least, it wasn't enough to get rid of the second-in-command of the Imperial Horse Directorate." However, Mao Mu really didn't have any more money. Qian Sengbao naturally wouldn't believe such words. But because Jining was still waiting for his news, time was of the essence. He decided that after dealing with the matter at hand, he would properly interrogate Mao Mu. He wasn't someone who could be beaten with just 200 taels of silver. Chapter 150. Mao Mu followed Qian Sengbao out of the palace and saw Qian Tong, who had already gathered 200 embroidered uniform guards. When Mao Mu's gaze met Tang Tong's, there was a look of sympathy in his eyes. They were all Wang Zhen's subordinates, and even Mao Mu had always been seen as one of Wang Zhen's trusted aides. His interaction with Yang Chendong was also because of Wang Zhen's instructions. Other than Wang Zhen, no one else knew Mao Mu's true identity. "Let's go." He did not care about the change in Mao Mu and Tang Tong's attitudes. Perhaps in Qian Sengbao's eyes, becoming the head eunuch of the Imperial Horse Directorate was what he needed to care about. Under Qian Sengbao's lead, the group of people left the capital and headed toward the Yang Manor 15 li south of the city. In the Yang Manor, there were already spies from the Bureau of Security who had brought back the news. When they found out that a large group of embroidered uniform guards was coming out of the city, the atmosphere in the manor immediately became tense. This result was within the expectations of Yang Si, Yang Lu, and the others. After killing Zhao Xian, they had been waiting, but they did not expect it to take so long. Since they had been waiting for a long time, there was not the slightest bit of panic. Dao Xiao led the second guard to hide outside the manor. Bai Zui led the Ghost Shadow Sniper Squad to find a suitable place to hide. Yang Lu took Yang Si's place and opened the door to face the enemy. Yang Si was still dissatisfied with this. However, last time, he had single-handedly defeated the embroidered uniform guards with a single shot. This time, it was not good for him to snatch the credit. An hour later, a group of embroidered uniform guards wearing flying fish robes arrived at the entrance of the Yang Manor. When the group led by Qian Sungbao arrived, they saw Yang Lu standing 100 steps away from them. He held a pitch-black firearm that they had never seen before and looked at them leisurely. In his eyes, there was a hint of disdain mixed within. This scene caused Qian Sungbao to be unable to vent his anger. It must be said that the embroidered uniform guards carried out many missions, but no matter where they went, and no matter what kind of status the other party had, who wouldn't tremble in fear and tremble when they saw them. This was the first time the Yang Manor had ignored them like this since the Great Ming was established. Based on this feeling of disregard, the people of the Yang Manor deserved to die. Qian Sengbao's eyes were filled with anger. He wanted to raise his hand and order the army to suppress them. However, when he thought about the mission Jin Ying had given him, which was to obtain the advanced firearms in one piece, he could only suppress his impulse. He looked at Tang Tong and said, "You go. Go." Qian Sengbao's eyes' face. "You. We're. You is. Us here. We. And Sungbao. And. Mu was manner. Was. Us was. A was. S. What crime did he commit? Yang Lu was ready to kill. He did not expect the other party to not attack immediately. Instead, he acted as if he was trying to reason with him. At the same time, he was a little disappointed. Naturally, he wouldn't give them a good face. When the matter involved Yang Si, he directly retorted, expressing his strong side. He hit the Walla's envoy and hurt both our countries. Qian Sungbao said. Tang Tong was still talking about the mistakes the other party had made. However, after a few sentences, he felt that something was wrong. The Walla and the Great Ming were like fire and water. Hitting the Walla's envoy was not a crime. Instead, it should be considered to have won glory for the country. Qian Sungbao could not continue. Yang Lu laughed and said, "What's wrong? You can't continue. The Walla is a villain. While paying tribute to our Ming dynasty, he actually dared to take the initiative to start a war. This kind of opponent should be beaten up. Not to mention that Yang Si brothers are not here. Even if they were, they should have done something meritorious and not wrong." This, Qian Sungbao rolled his eyes and said, "Meritorious or not, we have to bring it back and let the higher-ups decide. How about this? Brother, please step aside and allow us to find Yang Si and bring him back first. We will definitely give you an explanation. How about that?" Without an excuse, Qian Sungbao could not believe that Tang Tong still insisted on entering the manor. Everyone knew about Sima Zhao's personality. Needless to say, Yang Lu shrugged and spread his hands to show his refusal. "You go." Qian Sungbao, who was behind, saw Qian Sengbao's clumsy expression. He was naturally very angry that he had messed up the matter. He pointed at Mao Mu and instructed him to persuade Yang Lu. Mao Mu, of course, did not want to go. No matter what, Yang Qindong had done him a favor. Now that he was no longer around, he was unwilling to be a villain. However, this was not Qian Sengbao's idea. It was Jin Ying's idea. An arm could not win against a thigh. He had no other choice. Mao Mu reluctantly walked out from the crowd. His face was ashen as he walked to Tang Tong's side. As soon as Mao Mu appeared, Yang Lu's eyes were filled with suspicion. He stared into Mao Mu's eyes. Outsiders did not know about the relationship between Mao Mu and the sixth young master, but as a servant of the Yang family, he was very clear. Before the sixth young master left, he had instructed the security bureau to pay attention to Mao Mu's performance. At the same time, this was also a test. If Mao Mu could pass this test, he would definitely be put in an important position. On the other hand, if Mao Mu was a traitor, they would not mind getting rid of him and replacing him with someone else. Sensing Yang Lu's questioning gaze, Mao Mu hurriedly lowered his head. "We're here to look for Yang Si. If he's here, then hand him over. If you insist on not handing him over, then I'm afraid we'll force our way into the manor. Let me ask you, can you stop 200 of us by yourself?" Mao Mu's words were interrogative. However, if one listened carefully, it was as if he was telling Yang Lu that they would definitely enter the manor for an inspection today. Yang Lu should quickly think of a countermeasure. When Yang Lu heard Mao Mu's words, his expression was no longer as fierce as before. Since Mao Mu still had the heart to side with the Yang family manor, it would naturally not be good for him to target him. He immediately rushed towards Qian Sengbao, who was in the midst of the embroidered uniform guards, and said, "I will stand right here. Unless there is an imperial edict from Emperor Ingzong, no one is to take a step into the manor for no reason. If anyone dares to do so, then I'm sorry, but the weapon in my hand is not something to be jealous of." As if to intimidate, Yang Si raised his hand and fired the 95 style. His action was exactly the same as when Yang Si had blocked Xiao Xian. Bah! The moment the gunshot rang out, the embroidered uniform guards in front of him became chaotic. Qian Sengbao, who was hiding in the crowd, felt his eyes light up. After receiving the mission, he knew that the biggest goal of this trip was this advanced firearm. Now that it was in front of him, and he had seen it with his own eyes, he was very excited. However, at the same time, he was somewhat nervous. The 3 injured embroidered uniform guards flashed in front of him. Qian Sengbao, who did not know how many times this firearm could be fired, would not take the initiative to take the risk. On the contrary, he valued his own life very much. It was because of this that he had already made preparations for this trip. He waved his large hand behind him, and a group of 50 embroidered uniform guards holding fire barrels, also known as fire barrels, appeared. They held primitive bronze fire barrels in their hands, and they appeared at the front of the group. This type of fire barrel was lighter and more agile than the earliest firearms. The barrel was slender and the front was cylindrical, and it could be used to store bullets. The medicine room was bulged in the shape of a ball, and there was a fire door on the wall for a fuse to ignite the fire. The tail end was hollow, and there was a wooden handle, making it easy for the shooter to control. Torches were quickly lit, and 50 embroidered uniform guards held torches and looked forward, as if they were ready to light the fire barrels at any time. The sudden hostility caused the atmosphere to drop to a freezing point. Mao Mu and Tang Tong, who were standing in the middle of the field, were so scared that they fell to the ground. They did not know the power of the firearm in Yang Lu's hands, but they had seen the power of the fire barrels in the hands of the embroidered uniform guards behind them. If the guns were fired randomly, there was no telling where the target would be. If they still dared to stand in the middle, they would undoubtedly become living targets. Whether the 2 of them were afraid of death or of being accidentally injured, they simply lay on the ground. In comparison, Yang Lu stood there with the 9.5 style as if nothing had happened. He didn't show the slightest bit of fear because of the appearance of these fire cylinders. On the contrary, his eyes were full of radiance. It was as if he wanted to experience the power of these cylinders. Qian Sengbao saw Yang Lu's behavior and was naturally very dissatisfied. He actually could not scare the other party. It seemed that simple intimidation had lost its meaning. He had to be serious. He thought that as long as he could kill Yang Lu from a distance, he would be able to obtain the advanced firearm. Then, the mission that Jining gave him would be considered completed. He immediately shouted, "Everyone listen up! The target is straight ahead. If anyone resists, kill without mercy. The reason why he had to go first instead of shooting first was obviously because the power of the flamethrower couldn't reach that far. He wanted to shorten the distance between them. As long as he reached the effective range, he wouldn't hold back. It was because he knew the effective range of the fire barrels that Yang Lu was so fearless. Now that he saw the other party's troops moving forward, he raised his gun and let out a deafening gunshot. "Stop where you are. Otherwise, I will shoot whoever dares to move forward." His voice was loud and clear, firm and powerful. It represented Yang Lu's current mood. However, the embroidered uniform guards didn't really stop. Qian Sungbao had given a strict order and was supervising the battle from the rear. If any of them dared to stop at this moment, they would be punished by military law. Before they saw the power of the new firearm, who would dare to stop? Chapter 151. The embroidered uniform guards did not stop because of Yang Lu's words. They continued to walk forward in a straight line. From their point of view, there was no reason for them to lose when 200 people fought one person. However, they did not know that this scene was exactly what Yang Lu wanted. He was really worried that if he shouted a few words, he would scare them. If that happened, he would not be able to use his skills. Now that these people were not afraid of death, it was exactly what he wanted. He also had a chance to show off. His shout spread out. Seeing that the embroidered uniform guards did not move, Yang Lu smiled. He raised the 95 style in his hand and aimed it at the embroidered uniform guards at the front. He then adjusted his breathing, and his right index finger gently pulled the trigger. He began to fire one by one. In Yang Lu's eyes, the embroidered uniform guards who were lined up with fire barrels were like fixed targets. As long as he wanted to, he could easily take the life of any one of them. However, these people were not enemies, nor were they like the fugitives that Zhao Xian had brought. They were only soldiers who had received orders. They were not enemies who would not rest until one of them was dead. He did not need to kill them. He only needed to injure them and make them suffer heavy injuries to break their fighting spirit. Yang Lu moved the muzzle of the gun slightly from the original position of the forehead to the legs. His index finger moved slightly, and he fired the first shot. Bang! The second shot rang out. The spinning bullet flew forward and whistled through the air. It directly drilled into the right leg of an embroidered uniform guard. The bullet entered the flesh and brought about a huge impact. The moment it came into contact with the blood, there was a splash of blood. Next, a figure fell to the ground. Along with him was the green fire barrel that was originally in his hand. Bang, bang, bang. All of this was just the beginning. Following Yang Lu's continuous movements of his index finger, the embroidered uniform guards in the front row fell to the ground one after another. The extremely fast speed and accurate hit rate caused the embroidered uniform guards in the front row to become a complete mess. There was no one who wasn't afraid of death, especially when they knew that they were going to die. Even the embroidered uniform guards' morale began to waver. Some directly ran back. Some took the initiative to lie down on the ground, and some had already lit their barrels and poured out the gunpowder. As for whether they could hurt Yang Lu or not, they no longer cared. 7 shots were fired, and after taking down 7 armed embroidered uniform guards, the entire formation fell into chaos. Qian Sungbao, who was sandwiched in the crowd, was also completely frightened by this scene. The scene of Yang Lu shooting at the embroidered uniform guards flashed in his mind. From this, he concluded that the other party's firearms were indeed very advanced. Once Jining obtained them, who in the world would be a match for him? If he could hold such a powerful weapon in his hands, whether he gave it to Jining or kept it for himself, it would become the most powerful weapon he could use to intimidate others. Overjoyed, he ignored the chaos in the formation and shouted to the front, let's go together. What are you afraid of? No matter how powerful he can't kill all of us. Whoever rushes to the front and takes the firearm will be rewarded with 1,000 taels of silver and a promotion of 3 ranks. In order to achieve his goal, Qian Sungbao made a heavy promise. With a heavy reward, there were bound to be brave men. With this shout, many of the embroidered uniform guards who had been running back stopped in their tracks, thinking of how to make a name for themselves. Some of them made a fierce sound, turned around, and ran in Yang Lu's direction. The sudden change was noticed by Yang Lu. Naturally, he wasn't afraid of 8 or 10 people with one gun, but with so many of them charging at him together, he probably wouldn't even have the time to reload his gun. Originally, he wanted to be like Yang Si and fight the enemies alone, but now it seemed that he had underestimated the willpower of these embroidered uniform guards. He couldn't help but start to retreat. At the same time, he made a gesture with his right hand behind his back, telling the Ghost Shadow Sniper team, hidden inside the Yang village, to prepare to attack. Charge! Seeing that Yang Lu had started to retreat, the embroidered uniform guards couldn't help but be overjoyed. They seemed to have seen the light, saw the hope, and also saw that promotion and wealth were right in front of them. In the Yang village, Bai Zhuo and the other 21 people were lying on the roof, each looking for the best angle to shoot. They were just waiting for the embroidered uniform guards to run into their shooting range to kill them. As the embroidered uniform guards approached step by step, the atmosphere became very tense. A big battle could break out at any time. Once the Ghost Shadow Sniper team attacked, the scene would be filled with corpses. It would also mean that the Yang village and the great Ming dynasty had completely broken off. At this moment, everyone's hearts were thumping. They were nervous and excited. Bam, bam, bam. Just when the embroidered uniform guards were 200 steps away from the Yang village, and Bai Zhuo was about to give the order to shoot, a series of intense gunshots suddenly rang out from behind them. This sudden gunshot also shocked the Ghost Shadow Sniper team, who were ready to shoot. Captain Bai Zhuo didn't understand. They had agreed to attack first, and Dao Xiao and the second guard would finish them off. Why did they attack first? Captain, are we going to attack? One of the Ghost Shadow Sniper team members couldn't suppress the excitement in his heart and quietly asked Bai Zhuo, wait a minute, don't shoot first. Bai Zhuo looked at the Yang village's main gate in confusion. Then he took out his high-powered binoculars. When he looked at it, his expression became very excited. Tell everyone, don't shoot without orders. The 6th young master is back. Yang Chendong was indeed back. He led more than 30 people and rushed over. 1 man and 2 horses didn't stop to rest. Finally, they arrived at the Yang village at the last moment. When he saw a large group of embroidered uniform guards rushing into the village, he didn't say anything and gave the order to shoot. Yang Chendong viewed the Yang village as very important. Otherwise, he wouldn't have left Zhu Qizhen in such a hurry and rushed back first. He definitely wouldn't allow anyone to threaten the safety of his village and the lives of the people in the village. After Yang Chendong gave the order, the 30 people following him naturally wouldn't be polite. They raised their guns and roared. The unprepared, embroidered uniform guards behind them quickly fell. This also scared Qian Sungbao, who was in the crowd. He didn't understand where these people came from and how they actually dared to attack the embroidered uniform guards. Did they still have the law in their eyes? When he looked back with a puzzled heart, he saw a group of Ming dynasty soldiers wearing Mandarin duck battle jackets. The people who came were actually Ming dynasty soldiers, which made Qian Sungbao even more surprised. Since when did ordinary soldiers have the guts to attack the embroidered uniform guards? Moreover, where did those advanced firearms in their hands come from? In order to find out the reason, he ordered all the embroidered uniform guards to stop moving. He brought a few of his trusted subordinates and walked towards Yang Qindong at the back. At this time, Yang Qindong also gave the order to stop shooting. He wanted to see who couldn't help but attack the Yang village after he left. Of course, no matter who it was, he would make them pay the price in blood. As Qian Sungbao strode over, he naturally saw Yang Qindong in the crowd, although he was dressed differently from his usual azure robes. Who in the capital didn't know of the Dong Shui? Yang Qindong? It's actually you? Impudent! Who are you? How dare you call my family's name directly? Tiger's Mane, who was riding on a horse, had a cold look in his eyes. The muzzle of the pistol on his wrist was naturally pointed at Qian Sengbao's chest. Ha! You're just an insignificant fifth-rank official. You really don't enter this eunuch's eyes. My family's Qian Sungbao is the supervising eunuch of the Imperial Horse Directorate. Qian Sungbao reported his name amidst the laughter. Chapter 152. After the gunshot, Qian Sengbao's eyes widened, and he fell to the ground with an unwilling expression. Even as he died, his eyes were still wide open. He clearly couldn't believe that Yang Qindong would be so bold. Not only did he kill the embroidered uniform guards, he also killed the chief eunuch. Was he not afraid of the bright king's law? With Qian Sungbao dead, the other embroidered uniform guards looked at Yang Qindong with a strange gaze. At this moment, almost everyone was in a daze. They really didn't know if this person would be so bold as to kill them in the next breath. After all, he had already killed so many people, it didn't seem to matter if he killed a few more people. Under the protection of more than 30 guards and Lung Feng, Yang Qindong rode past the embroidered uniform guards who were kneeling on the ground in fear. He saw Tang Tong, who was also kneeling on the ground and trembling, as well as Mao Mu, whose eyes were filled with surprise. Watch these people. Without this uncle's orders, don't let a single one escape. Also, take care of these corpses. Eunuch Mao and Captain Tang, follow me into the manor, Yang Qindong said in a low voice, then turned and walked into the manor. At the entrance of the manor, Yang Lu was already kneeling on the ground respectfully. In the whole world, only the 6th young master could make him kneel so willingly. Get up. You've worked hard. When he passed by Yang Lu, Yang Qindong's voice became much more amiable. It was this "you've worked hard" that made Yang Lu have the urge to cry. However, he instinctively held back his tears and said, "To be loyal to the 6th young master is a subordinate's duty and obligation." Very good. Yang Qindong nodded lightly. He leaped past Yang Lu and headed straight for the entrance of the Yang Manor. Here, he saw Qiao Yin, Madame Shui, and Madame Xiang. Of course, he also saw 7th Sister Yang Duo and Hu Yen. Young master. When they saw Yang Qindong appear safe and sound, Qiao Yin and the others immediately burst into tears. From the looks of it, they seemed to have endless things to say. Don't cry. Young master, didn't I come back safe and sound? Hee, I have some matters to attend to. After I'm done, I'll have a long chat with you. Yang Qindong said to the girls with a happy expression. When his gaze fell on Hu Yen, he nodded lightly. Under their gazes, Hu Yen was immediately embarrassed. She had a feeling that her actions this time would definitely be accepted by Yang Qindong, and even her entire person would be accepted by him. Tang Tong and Mao Mu didn't even dare to raise their heads as they followed Yang Qindong into the Yang Manor. Just now, Qian Sungbao was killed without saying a word. They really didn't know if they would be killed because of their inappropriate actions next. perhaps from Yang Qindong's performance just now. The two of them had already crowned this Dong Shuai with the title of daring to the extreme. If it was possible, they could even say that he was rebelling. In the side hall, Yang Qindong sat down. Tiger's mane stood on his left, and Beta Persei stood on his right to ensure his absolute safety. Xiao Yin still played the role of a personal maid. After taking the initiative to serve tea, she left. Needless to say, Yang Qindong was indeed a little thirsty after rushing all the way here. He didn't care about his image and drank the tea in one gulp. Then his gaze fell on Tang Tong and asked, "Tell me what's going on." "Dong Shuai, I'm innocent. I'm just following orders. I don't have the slightest intention of becoming enemies with the Yang clan." Tang Tong, who was called out, knelt on the ground with a plop. It could be seen that he was extremely afraid now. His original backer, Wang Zhen, had fallen. Now, he had become a fish on the chopping board. Since Yang Qindong killed Qian Sengbao without batting an eye, what was he to him? There was probably no difference between killing him and killing a chicken. He knew that Tang Tong, a Qianhu official, didn't have much ability and didn't dare to have any ideas about the Yang clan. Thus, he ignored him and looked at Mao Mu. "Tell me, how has the current situation changed?" After seeing Yang Qindong kill Qian Sengbao with his own eyes, it would be a lie to say that Mao Mu wasn't afraid. In the past, he chose to rely on Yang Qindong because he liked his ability to make money and wanted to hitch a ride. Facts proved that his choice was right. He was promoted several times and became one of the eunuchs in charge of the ceremony directorate. Although he was ranked last and didn't have any real power, he was still one of the chief eunuchs. When he first heard the news that the emperor and all the officials had died on the battlefield, Mao Mu sighed that his life was not good. It wasn't easy to find a wise emperor, but he died in a few days. He became a person without anyone to rely on. This time, when he saw Yang Qindong come back, it would be a lie to say that he wasn't excited. But this excitement was completely frightened after seeing Qian Sengbao killed with his own eyes. In his eyes, Yang Qindong's actions were no different from a rebellion. If he got close to him, wouldn't he also indirectly walk on a road of no return? He was truly afraid and had many thoughts. Facing Yang Qindong's question, he didn't know how to answer. He just copied Tang Tong and knelt on the ground, trembling all over. He couldn't even let out a fart for a long time. Gently shaking his head, Yang Qindong saw Mao Mu's expression. He could guess what the other party was thinking. He took out a secret letter and handed it to Mao Mu. "Take a look. What is this? With your status, you should be able to recognize whose handwriting this is." A letter was handed to him. Mao Mu curiously reached out to take it. When he slowly opened it and saw the handwriting and content, his original nervousness turned into excitement and then joy. He immediately kowtowed heavily to the ground. "This little one greets Uncle Zhongdan, greets Uncle Zhongdan." When Yang Qindong saw this scene, he couldn't help but sigh in his heart. It seemed that there were still many things that he needed to do. Even Mao Mu, who had a close relationship with him and had even recognized him as his master, believed in imperial power so much. If he really declared himself king, there probably wouldn't be many people in the world who would sincerely respond to him. Even if he relied on advanced weapons to become king, it was a situation that was formed under pressure. It wasn't a situation that he sincerely submitted to. While Yang Qindong was still sighing, Tang Tong, who was kneeling on the ground at the same time, had a strange look in his eyes. He didn't understand why eunuch Mao had such a huge change. As if sensing Tang Tong's confusion, Mao Mu handed the letter to him and said, "Take a look. This is a reward from the emperor. It is definitely written by Ingzong." After receiving the letter, Tang Tong looked over and quickly kowtowed to the ground. At the same time, he shouted, "This official greets Uncle Zhongdan, greets Uncle Zhongdan. Okay, both of you get up. Now, you can clearly explain the situation in the court to this uncle." After revealing his trump card, Yang Qindong had won the trust of the two. With Zhu Qizhen's personal handwriting, Mao Mu naturally didn't have any psychological burdens and began to speak of everything he knew. Occasionally, Tang Tong would add a few words. As he listened to the two, Yang Qindong's expression turned grave, and he couldn't help but sigh at the power of the wheel of history. Although he had saved Zhu Qizhen, this did not change the fact that the Mastiff King had become Daizong. Moreover, without Yu Qian, the court was completely under eunuch Jin Ying's control. Yang Qindong also had no good impression of Jining. This eunuch was essentially jackals of the same tribe as Wang Zhen, and he was also not a good person. With him here, Daizong would probably find it very difficult to become a wise sovereign. It took an hour for Mao Mu and Tang Tong to give a rough account of the situation in the capital, but even this was not complete. Fortunately, Yang Qindong had already understood and had a general understanding of the situation. Okay, this uncle already knows the situation. I presume that you've already guessed that Ingzong is fine and is currently heading to the capital under the protection of soldiers. This uncle is merely a vanguard official. Now comes the problem. The great Ming now has two emperors. How will you choose? As Yang Qindong spoke, he turned his deep eyes to Mao Mu and Tang Tong, intending to force them to state their stance. He had even made up his mind. It would be fine if these two were willing to swear loyalty to Zhu Qizhen, but if they weren't, he would kill them both. Until he had infiltrated the palace and met with Empress Qian, his return could not be exposed. Sensing the pressure in Yang Qindong's eyes, Mao Mu made his choice without the slightest hesitation. This lowly one is a eunuch appointed by Ingzong, and naturally must swear loyalty to him. Yes, this lowly one is also loyal to Ingzong. This time, Tang Tong reacted quickly and made his choice right behind Mao Mu. Okay. This answer was within Yang Qindong's expectations. They had all been glorious figures of Ingzong's era, but now that Daizong had been replaced, Jining viewed them as dissidents, and they were on the verge of being eliminated. It had always been easy to choose where to go. Since all of you have chosen Ingzong like this uncle, it is time for us to repay His Imperial Majesty's kindness. Mao Mu, immediately arrange for me to enter the palace and meet with Empress Qian. Remember, only you can know of this matter. As for how much silver it will cost, I will prepare it for you in a little while. Tang Tong, immediately get in touch with those embroidered uniform guard leaders. This emperor is also the commander of the embroidered uniform guard. As long as they join me, their past mistakes can be forgiven. Of course, Yang Qindong would also choose to work for Ingzong, Zhu Qizhen. This was not about who he wanted to swear loyalty to, but in the current situation, Ingzong was clearly at a disadvantage. He had to help him gain a foothold. In his opinion, whether it was Ingzong, Zhu Qizhen, or Daizong, Zhu Qiyu as the emperor, they could not be too strong. It would be best if the two emperors worked together. This way, he would be able to benefit from both sides. Now, that Ingzong was at a disadvantage. He naturally had to help him. You're tuning in to the Mystic Fist YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.